Flynn Parker was trying his best to disappear behind a narrow, overloaded bookshelf when Kira Lambert's sharp eyes caught him. He wasn't attempting stealth with any real conviction, though. His imposing 6'2" frame was awkwardly folded into a crouch, practically swallowing the colorful covers of the mass-market romance section. Worse, a pair of highly polished, expensive designer shoes were peeking conspicuously from beneath the lowest shelf. It would have been genuinely laugh-out-loud funny if the grim anxiety twisting his features weren't so obvious. "Are you all right back there? Or should I call security?" Kira asked, subtly leaning into the aisle to get a better look at the peculiar man. She had been on a mission, hunting for the much-anticipated new historical fiction release that dominated all the literary buzz, when the sight of the distressed man had stopped her cold. Flynn's rich brown eyes immediately blew wide with genuine alarm. "Shoo!" he hissed, his voice a low, frantic expulsion of air. He instantly seemed to regret the abrupt rudeness. "Oh God, I'm so sorry, but please keep your voice down." His eyes frantically scanned past the racks toward the front entrance of the independent bookstore. Kira followed his worried gaze. Near the antique wooden checkout counter stood an elegantly coiffed older woman engaged in conversation with an equally pristine, if somewhat bored-looking, younger woman. The tableau screamed tailored tweed and inherited wealth. "Let me hazard a guess," Kira whispered, dropping into an easy crouch beside him, a smile playing on her lips. "A blind date gone horribly wrong? Worse," Flynn muttered, his voice ragged with defeat. "A mother-engineered blind date. That formidable woman over there is my mother, Eleanor, and the poor soul with her is Jessica, the daughter of one of her country club compatriots." The whispers in the 40th floor conference room had been spreading like a contagion for weeks. Sebastian Cole, the undisputed, ruthless mafia boss who governed the sprawling Blackstone empire with an unyielding iron fist, could no longer dismiss them as mere chatter. Arya Bennett, the frail young woman assigned to the night cleaning crew, a ghost who moved silently through the expensive halls, defined by her haunted amber eyes and determined solitude, had been repeatedly observed accessing restricted areas long after midnight. Security footage captured her lingering at the digital terminals in the financial department, slipping into the main server room during times she clearly believed she was unobserved, and even plugging unauthorized USB devices into machines containing the organization's most heavily guarded data. With the brutal underground war against the rival Moretti family reaching its terrifying zenith and persistent rumors of a high-level mole inside his own carefully constructed empire, Sebastian understood that even the slightest possibility of betrayal was a lethal risk. In his world, treachery had only one swift, non-negotiable end. Tonight, he would set aside his lieutenants and follow her himself. What he was about to uncover would not only completely shatter his ingrained assumptions about this mysterious cleaning lady, but would shake the very foundations of everything he thought he knew about the nature of trust, the true cost of sacrifice, and the possibility of redemption. Watch until the end to understand the profound paradox of why sometimes the most outwardly broken person carries the greatest and most desperate strength, and why a powerful mafia boss who had painstakingly learned to trust absolutely no one ultimately decided to risk everything to protect a woman who appeared to have nothing left to lose. If this intensely moving story resonates with you, hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to hear this lesson. He dragged a trembling hand through his thick, dark hair, causing it to stand up slightly in disarray, a perfect reflection of his internal chaos. "This is the third accidental meeting she's set up for me this month alone." Kira couldn't stop the soft, genuine peal of laughter that escaped her. "And you're what, 28? 32, he corrected, sighing dramatically. "And apparently that's prehistoric in my mother's estimation. She's entirely convinced I'll die alone, surrounded only by my—" He cut himself off abruptly, his shoulders stiffening. "Surrounded by your what?" Kira prompted, intrigued by the sudden silence and the intensity in his eyes. "Nothing. Just work stuff. It's unimportant," Flynn stammered, clearing his throat awkwardly. "Look, I know this is entirely bizarre, but I am desperate. Could you possibly help me stage an extraction? There's a discreet back exit by the staff room, but they will absolutely spot me if I just make a dash for the door." Kira glanced at the slim watch on her wrist. Her afternoon schedule was blessedly empty, consisting mostly of getting home before the autumn chill truly set in. But there was something undeniably appealing about the stranger's predicament, coupled with the genuine warmth emanating from his anxious brown eyes, that made her want to commit to the bit. What exactly did you have in mind for this highly covert operation? Flynn's relief was immediate and almost painful to witness. I don't know. Create some kind of noisy distraction? Or pretend to be my incredibly captivating girlfriend? I am truly at the end of my rope here. Pretending to be your girlfriend seems a bit excessive for a person whose name I don't even know yet, Kira pointed out, raising a skeptical eyebrow. Flynn Parker, he responded instantly, offering a large hand awkwardly from his cramped position. And you are the legendary Kira Lambert? She shook his hand, registering the unexpected warmth and firmness of his grip. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. Because sometimes the most unexpected people teach us the most crucial lessons about what truly matters in life. Sebastian Cole awoke precisely at 5 o'clock in the morning, a habit as immutable as the sunrise, in his sprawling penthouse perched atop the tallest skyscraper in Manhattan. The cold, relentless light of the city that never slept filtered through the floor-to-ceiling reinforced glass, washing over a meticulously curated living space of over 300 square meters, a domain designed by the world's most sought-after architects. Everything was flawless, arranged in a display of curated emptiness, from the custom black Italian leather sofa worth close to $500,000, to the obscure abstract painting by a master artist on the far wall, to the hidden sound system that automatically initiated soft classical music the moment his feet crossed the threshold from the master bedroom. Yet, none of this overwhelming luxury could succeed in concealing the deep, penetrating cold that seemed to seep into every corner of the home. There was no casual sound of laughter, no palpable warmth, only the heavy, echoing silence of a place far too large, too immaculate, for one man and one solitary child. Sebastian stepped into the marble-clad bathroom and paused before his reflection. The severe, cold face was visibly marked by a faint, silver scar running from his left temple down toward his cheekbone, the permanent trace of a failed assassination attempt 9 long years earlier. His steel-gray eyes showed no trace of fatigue, even though he had only managed 3 hours of fragmented sleep the previous night. His formidable mind remained fixed, relentlessly circling the image of the mysterious cleaning woman and the undeniable proof captured by the security cameras. "All right, Flynn Parker," she declared, pulling her hand back. "Today is apparently your lucky day. I'm feeling disproportionately generous, and frankly, I adore participating in a well-executed escape plan." A genuine, dazzling smile transformed Flynn's face, instantly smoothing out the worried creases etched around his eyes. "You are saving my life, Kira. Literally. Don't send the thank you card just yet," Kira cautioned. "Your mother looks pretty laser-focused." She peered discreetly around the edge of the bookshelf. The elegant woman, Eleanor, was now performing a slow, calculated scan of the store, looking like a hawk spotting prey. "Okay, here is the modified plan," Kira whispered, thinking rapidly. "I'll approach them and the clerk. Make sure they are deeply preoccupied, by asking for help finding a specific book, something incredibly obscure and technical. While they are fully distracted, you use the opportunity to slip out through the back. Deal?" Flynn nodded vigorously, eyes burning with hope. "Deal. I owe you everything." Kira stood, smoothing down the skirt of her simple, deep blue dress, and walked with purposeful confidence toward the front of the store. As she neared Flynn's mother and the prospective date, she adopted her most earnest, subtly perplexed customer expression. "Excuse me," she said, addressing the young store clerk who had just finished restocking a pile of new arrivals and was now chatting with Eleanor and Jessica. "I am searching for a very specific and rather rare text on architectural history in post-war Central Europe. It's highly technical, and I was told this particular branch might have it." He had just finished meticulously adjusting the silk tie beneath his standard 3-piece black suit when a soft, almost hesitant knock sounded at the door. Ethan stood in the doorway of his father's bedroom, his slightly curly black hair, mirroring Sebastian's own, still disheveled from sleep. His large eyes looked up, lifted by a shy, hopeful curiosity. "Dad, can I have breakfast with you?" The 8-year-old's voice was barely a whisper, as if he were genuinely afraid the simple request would be denied. Sebastian looked at his son, and in that brief, unguarded moment, the ice that typically encased the Mafia boss's face softened, just perceptibly. He nodded, placed a heavy but gentle hand on Ethan's small shoulder, and walked with him down to the enormous dining room where the nanny had already prepared a sparse breakfast. They sat across from each other at a table long enough to comfortably seat 20 people, yet only 2 places were set, relegated to one distant end. Ethan ate slowly, constantly glancing up at his father, as if desperately wanting to articulate something significant. Sebastian, noticing the deep unease clouding his son's clear eyes, gently set down his knife and asked if there was something specific he wanted to say. Ethan hesitated, twisting the napkin in his lap before finally asking a series of hard questions. Why his father never managed to come home for dinner, why he was not permitted to go to school like the other children he saw in parks, why he had no real friends, and the final question, a silent dagger, froze Sebastian completely in place. Why his mother was not here with them. The temperature of the room seemed to drop immediately, turning to solid ice. Sebastian looked into his son's clear, innocent eyes that were terrifyingly similar to the woman who had fatally betrayed him, and felt the familiar, agonizing pain twist violently in his chest. He could not, dare not, tell Ethan the corrosive truth. As Kira launched into a complex, elaborate description of her fictional volume, skillfully weaving in made-up authors and precise, non-existent details about specific construction techniques, she observed Flynn's mother and Jessica subtly drifting away from the counter, their interest visibly waning the deeper she got into concrete block reconstruction versus brutalism. From the periphery of her vision, Kira saw Flynn make his decisive move. He slipped silently behind a towering display of oversized art books, melting into the shadows, and heading swiftly toward the employees' only area at the back. The clerk, though apologetic that they didn't stock the title, remained helpful, diligently offering to special order the non-existent book. Kira maintained the charade for a few more strategic minutes until she was absolutely certain Flynn had secured his freedom. "Actually, I just remembered the title is terribly out of print," she said smoothly, offering a bright smile. "I believe I'll try the specialist used bookstore downtown instead. Thank you so much for your time and assistance." As she turned to leave, she nearly walked straight into Eleanor, Flynn's mother. "I couldn't help but overhear your fascinating inquiry," the older woman said, her tone perfectly polished but slightly probing. "Are you an architect yourself, dear?" "Oh no," Kira replied effortlessly, maintaining her smooth demeanor. "Just a devoted hobbyist. I have always been deeply fascinated by buildings and the unique stories they tell about the people who create them." Eleanor nodded, appearing to lose interest the moment she realized Kira wasn't a professional connection. Kira seized the brief opportunity and made her own swift exit. Outside, the late afternoon autumn air was sharp and invigorating, and the main street was bustling with the flow of weekend shoppers. Kira was contemplating crossing the street to reward her efforts with a good latte when a gentle, warm pressure touched her arm. He could not tell him that his mother had actively sold crucial information to their greatest enemy, that she had nearly succeeded in destroying the empire his own father had built with literal blood and decades of struggle, that he had spared her life only because she was carrying Ethan in her womb, that she had subsequently fled and died shortly after giving birth. So he offered only a carefully constructed lie, that Ethan's mother had gone very far away and was unable to return. He promised, a rare commitment, that he would try harder to come home earlier, and that he would find a legitimate way for Ethan to finally have friends. Ethan nodded slowly, trying to force a smile, but the profound sadness lingered visibly in his eyes. At precisely 7 o'clock in the morning, Sebastian left the penthouse, leaving Ethan in the care of the nanny and 2 rotating bodyguards who maintained a silent, 24-hour watch over the child. In the private elevator descending swiftly to the basement garage, he glanced again at his reflection and watched his face return to its familiar, impenetrable coldness. Inside the long, black Maybach, which glided almost silently through the streets of awakening Manhattan, Sebastian found himself thinking of his former wife, of the unforgettable night he uncovered the catastrophic betrayal, of the look in her eyes when she was caught in the act of copying classified data for Victor Moretti. He had loved her deeply, trusted her implicitly, opened himself up completely to her, and she had plunged a knife into his back without a flicker of hesitation. From that moment of rupture onward, Sebastian swore an internal oath. He would never fully trust any woman again. His heart had subsequently frozen solid, leaving only one small, fiercely protected corner reserved for Ethan. "That was absolutely brilliant," Flynn whispered, his eyes sparkling with raw gratitude and amusement. "Architectural history? You had me completely convinced. I thought you were about to pull out blueprints." Kira laughed, the tension finally dissipating. "I took exactly one architecture survey class in college. I figured I could bluff my way through if the stakes were high enough." "Well, the bluff worked flawlessly," Flynn confirmed, shaking his head in amazement. "My mother is still in there. She's probably interrogating Jessica about her 5-year investment plan right now." He visibly shuddered at the thought. "Can I at least buy you that coffee? It's the very least I can do for my hero, my rescuer." There was an appealing, disarming earnestness in his request. Kira found herself nodding before she could overthink it. "Sure, why not? There's an excellent little place directly across the street." As they waited for the crosswalk light to change, Flynn glanced back one last time at the bookstore's facade. "I should feel deeply guilty, but honestly, this is the third coincidental setup this month. My mother's methods are becoming desperate." "Why?" Kira asked immediately, then regretted the slightly forward tone. "You seem perfectly capable of finding your own dates." Flynn, however, looked pleased rather than offended. "Thank you for the unexpected vote of confidence. I think my mother operates under the distinct fear that I work too much. She has this persistent nightmare that I'll wake up at 60 and realize I've forgotten to actually have a life outside of the office." The cafe they entered was a warm, welcoming refuge, the air thick with the rich, complex aroma of dark roast coffee and cinnamon. They found a small, slightly secluded table near the window. Flynn insisted on ordering for both of them, treating her like a valued client rather than a stranger he'd just met hiding behind mass-market paperbacks. And now, he was on his way to the Blackstone Empire to determine the fate of a humble cleaning woman with haunting amber eyes, whom he suspected of executing the exact same betrayal. The Blackstone Empire building rose impossibly tall in the heart of Manhattan's financial district like a 60-story fortress of glass and polished steel. Its severe silhouette cut sharply against the dull gray sky of the winter morning. To the oblivious outside world, it was merely the headquarters of one of the most powerful and influential investment corporations in the United States, managing tens of billions of dollars in assets and holding controlling shares in countless companies spanning everything from global real estate development to cutting-edge technology. But to those few who knew how to truly look beneath the gleaming surface, Blackstone Empire was the cold, beating heart of a sprawling shadow empire that controlled the entire East Coast. The operations ranged from secret, high-stakes casinos to vast loan sharking networks. From international arms trafficking to contracts no one dared to breathe about in the light of day. Sebastian stepped out of his private elevator on the 40th floor, an exclusive realm where only those he trusted most implicitly were ever allowed to set foot. 2 enormous bodyguards in identical black suits stood rigid as marble statues on either side of the polished double doors, bowing low as their boss passed. The long corridor leading to the main conference room was lined with thick, sound-dampening carpet, and the walls were hung with original classical paintings valued at millions of dollars. Yet, the air itself felt heavy, cold, and suffocatingly charged with latent power. Inside the conference room, 12 men were already seated around a massive black oak table, easily more than 10 meters long. "So, what exactly is it that you do that keeps you so incredibly busy?" Kira asked once the barista had collected their order slips. "I'm in real estate development," Flynn replied quickly, perhaps a beat too quickly, his demeanor instantly turning professional. "And what about you, the architectural historian in residence?" "I'm a librarian at the university," Kira admitted. Nothing quite as exciting or high stakes as real estate, I assure you. Flynn's face brightened considerably. A librarian. That explains the astonishingly convincing book talk. Do you actually enjoy it? I genuinely love it, Kira said, slightly surprised by the genuine depth of his interest. Every day is different. Students and faculty come in searching for everything from rare, obscure medieval texts to cutting-edge modern economic theories. It often feels less like a job and more like a never-ending, highly specific treasure hunt. Their coffee arrived, a creamy latte for her and a severe black coffee for him. They settled into an easy, flowing conversation. Kira found herself spontaneously sharing lighthearted anecdotes about her most eccentric library patrons, while Flynn, in turn, talked about the unique experience of growing up with a mother who held incredibly strong opinions on everything, from his chosen career path to his required sock selection. So, Kira finally ventured, taking a sip of her latte. Why are you so resistant to your mother's persistent matchmaking attempts? Jessica seemed perfectly nice from the fleeting glimpse I caught. Flynn leaned back slightly, a shadow of seriousness crossing his face. It's not truly about Jessica specifically. It's about the fundamental desire to meet someone naturally, authentically, not because our respective mothers have determined that our investment portfolios are compatible. He hesitated, looking down at his coffee cup. I want what my parents had before my dad passed away. These were Sebastian's highest-ranking lieutenants, each commanding a crucial sector of his empire, and each knowing intimately that unquestioning loyalty was the absolute only thing keeping him alive and wealthy. Sebastian took the executive chair at the head of the table without uttering a single word, letting his razor-sharp gaze slowly pass over each anxious face. The silence stretched out until it became truly unbearable, a physical pressure in the sealed room. The meeting commenced with a detailed report on the ongoing war with the Moretti family. Victor Moretti had aggressively attacked two of Sebastian's key operations in the preceding month alone, resulting in the deaths of 4 men and the theft of a critical shipment of military-grade weapons valued at $2 million. Moretti was growing dangerously aggressive, acting with a confidence that suggested he knew every calculated move the Blackstone Empire was about to make before it was even executed. Sebastian listened impassively, his steel-gray eyes revealing absolutely nothing, until Daniel Mercer, the head of security, stood up and physically dragged a man into the room. The man, named Marco, was 32 years old and had been responsible for logistics within the empire for the last 5 years. Marco was handcuffed, his face a swollen map of bruises, his eyes wild with undisguised panic as he was forced to his knees directly before Sebastian. Daniel reported in a cold, monotone voice that they had discovered Marco had been selling highly sensitive information to Moretti for 3 months, including critical transport schedules and detailed lists of secret holding facilities. Marco immediately dissolved into wretched tears and began begging, stammering that he had been coerced, that Moretti had threatened his family, that he had no other viable choice. Sebastian rose smoothly and stepped directly before the traitor, and the room seemed to freeze solid, every breath held. They met totally randomly at a bus stop during a rainstorm. No setup, no hidden agenda, just 2 people connecting because they happened to be in the right place at the right time. There was a genuine vulnerability in his expression that instantly softened Kira's heart. That's surprisingly romantic for a hardened real estate developer. Don't tell anyone, he warned, flashing a teasing smile. It would absolutely ruin my meticulously crafted reputation as a ruthless businessman. There was a profound warmth in his eyes, however, that made Kira feel as though they had known each other far longer than just the past hour. As they finished their drinks, Flynn checked his watch with a noticeable reluctance. I probably should be getting back to work. I have a few vital calls to make before dinner. He looked genuinely disappointed to be leaving. But I would really like to see you again, Kira, he added, his voice low. Properly this time. No hiding behind the bodice rippers in the romance section. I'd like that, too, Kira admitted, slightly surprised by the sincerity of her own feeling. They exchanged phone numbers. Flynn walked her all the way to her car, extracting a promise that she would text him the moment she got home safely. As she drove away, Kira couldn't stop the wide, genuine smile that kept creeping onto her face. What had begun as a simple, mundane trip to browse for a book had morphed into an unexpected encounter that felt, quite strangely, like the very beginning of something truly significant. What Kira didn't yet realize was just how significant Flynn Parker truly was. His casual description of his occupation, real estate development, was a profound understatement of his actual position and influence. Parker Developments wasn't merely a real estate company. It was, in fact, one of the largest and most prestigious privately owned development firms operating on the entire East Coast. He looked down at Marco with eyes utterly devoid of mercy, and said in a voice that was terrifyingly gentle, almost conversational, that in this world, everyone always had a choice, and Marco had chosen fatalistically wrong. No one had time to even twitch. Sebastian drew the customized pistol concealed inside his suit jacket and fired a single, clean shot directly through Marco's forehead. The gunshot cracked through the sealed, sound-absorbing room like a thunderclap, and then there was only the ringing silence. Marco's body collapsed heavily to the floor, bright arterial blood rapidly spreading across the expensive wool carpet. Sebastian calmly put the gun back away, seamlessly returning to his seat as if he had just completed a particularly tedious piece of bureaucratic paperwork. The 11 men remaining in the room barely dared to take a full breath. It was a stark, bloody reminder that betrayal had only one brutal ending, and Sebastian Cole never, under any circumstances, hesitated when the time came to act. After the body was efficiently removed, Daniel Mercer remained behind to brief Sebastian privately on the cleaning woman. He opened his laptop and projected the security footage from the building onto the large screen. Sebastian watched the thin cleaning woman, her brown hair pulled tightly high, her amber eyes lowered as she pushed her heavy cart down the corridor. But what followed was what demanded his absolute attention. The camera showed her entering the finance office 5 nights in a row during the past week. Each time, she stayed for a suspicious duration, ranging from 45 minutes to over an hour, sitting specifically at a computer terminal, typing continuously, and even plugging a USB drive into the stone port. Daniel suggested the obvious: arresting her immediately and interrogating her using the organization's usual, unspoken methods. But Sebastian immediately ordered him to halt. Something felt deeply wrong. Their portfolio ranged from ultra-luxury, high-rise condominiums to groundbreaking revitalized urban spaces. And Flynn wasn't just working there. He was the owner and the CEO, having built the modern, sprawling empire from the solid, but small portfolio of properties he had inherited from his late father. The following evening, Kira was curled up comfortably on her sofa with a novel when her phone vibrated, signaling a text from Flynn. "Dinner tomorrow night. I know a place with truly excellent architectural history." Kira smiled broadly at the reference to her clever bookstore fabrication. Asterisk sounds perfect. As long as there are no surprise blind dates lurking around corners. Asterisk I promise. Just the two of us. I'll pick you up at 7. After exchanging a few more messages and her home address, Kira attempted to return to her book, but found it impossible to concentrate. There was an intense quality about Flynn that intrigued her. A palpable sincerity and depth beneath his effortlessly polished, businessman exterior that she rarely encountered in her usually quiet life. When Flynn arrived the next evening, Kira was momentarily surprised to see him driving a modest, though impeccably maintained, dark sedan, rather than the conspicuous, flashy sports car she might have stereotypically expected from someone working in high-end real estate development. "You look absolutely beautiful," he said as she opened the door to her apartment, his warm eyes taking in the simplicity of her black dress with genuine, unforced appreciation. "Thank you," she replied, suddenly feeling a pleasant wave of shyness. "You clean up pretty well yourself, Mr. Parker." Flynn drove them several blocks to a small, hidden Italian restaurant tucked away on a dimly lit side street. It wasn't flashy or ostentatious in the slightest, but the moment they stepped inside, Kira could sense that this place was special. If she were a professional spy, why would she operate with such blatant, open visibility? If she was selling highly valuable information, where was the evidence of the money? Her life was clearly still defined by abject poverty. Sebastian stared intensely at the screen, at the tired yet fiercely focused face of Arya Bennett, and decided he would uncover the definitive answer himself before taking any irreversible action. At precisely 10 o'clock in the evening, when the very last of the employees of Blackstone Empire had evacuated the building and the lights in the corporate offices were slowly dimming, Arya Bennett began her shift. She pushed the heavy cleaning cart out of the supply room in the deepest basement, stepped into the service elevator, and pressed the button to ascend. In the reflection of the elevator's grimy mirror, she saw herself and almost failed to recognize the woman looking back. The dark brown hair that had once been meticulously styled at the most expensive salons in New York was now yanked loosely high with a cheap, stretched elastic band. The amber eyes that once sparkled with sharp intelligence while analyzing complex financial reports were now hollowed out by crippling lack of sleep, with dark, bruise-like circles permanently etched beneath them. Her cheekbones were unnaturally sharper because she had dropped nearly 10 kilograms over the past 3 years. Meals skipped to save money for Lucas's specialized medicine were slowly eating away at her own body from the inside out. The dark blue janitor's uniform hung too loosely on her skeletal frame. The sleeves had to be rolled twice to even fit her arms, and the worn sneakers, their heels rubbed thin, were the only things she still possessed from her previous life. She looked down at her hands. Fingers that once flew across trading keyboards, moving millions of dollars in instantaneous transactions, were now rough and permanently cracked from prolonged exposure to cleaning chemicals. The lighting was soft and warm, the decor was elegant yet comforting, and the intoxicating aromas wafting from the kitchen were instantly mouth-watering. Marco, the elderly Italian owner, immediately hurried over to greet them like a long-lost son. "Mr. Parker, your usual table is ready and waiting." Flynn thanked him easily and turned to Kira. "Marco makes the best, most authentic risotto in the entire city. I discovered this place completely by accident years ago when one of my early projects was being developed nearby." They were led to a cozy, secluded corner table. Marco himself brought them wine without having to be asked. "The special bottle as you requested," he murmured to Flynn with a knowing, conspiratorial smile. As they settled in, Kira couldn't help noticing how familiar and easy the entire staff seemed with Flynn. "You must frequent this place often," she observed. "Whenever I can possibly manage it," Flynn admitted, leaning forward slightly. "It's one of the very few places where I feel I can genuinely relax and just be myself, without the need for the usual performance." There was an underlying tone in his voice that instantly piqued Kira's curiosity. "And who exactly are you when you're not being yourself?" Flynn looked momentarily caught off guard by the unexpected depth of the question. "That is a surprisingly profound question for a first official date." He smiled, but Kira watched him consider his answer carefully. "I suppose what I mean is that in my line of work, there is a substantial amount of performance required. Non-stop meetings, aggressive presentations, delicate negotiations. Here, at Marco's, I'm just a guy who truly appreciates excellent food and wonderful company." Kira nodded, sensing there was more nuance to his answer, but deciding not to push the issue. Her nails were cut almost to the quick so they would not catch while scrubbing filthy toilets. She was 28 years old, yet she looked far past 35. The elevator shuddered to a stop at the 15th floor, and Arya began her familiar, grueling work. She pushed the cart through each sterile office, collecting overflowing trash, mechanically wiping down desks, running the noisy vacuum over the carpets, and polishing the glass partitions. Every single room served as a cruel reminder of what she had irrevocably lost. The polished oak desks identical to the one she once owned at Morgan Whitfield, the computer screens filled with flashing financial charts exactly like the ones she had worked on every day, the impressive degrees and certificates hung on the walls like the ones she had once been so profoundly proud to possess before everything was violently ripped away from her. She paused briefly before a glass-walled office that offered a spectacular, sweeping view of Manhattan at night, the city lights sparkling below like a million errant stars fallen to earth. 3 years earlier, she had stood before a window exactly like this one, wearing an elegant gray suit, her hair professionally curled, a designer coffee cup in hand, feeling unequivocally as if the entire world lay within her grasp. Arya Bennett, 25 years old, the youngest financial analyst ever promoted at Morgan Whitfield, the one her colleagues whispered about and called a data prodigy, the one who could glance at a simple balance sheet and instantaneously perceive anomalies no one else could see. That powerful self-image shattered in her mind like broken glass as the memory of the fateful day flooded back. She remembered that morning, just moments before she was scheduled to submit her report exposing Richard Whitfield, the company's chief financial officer, for a massive money laundering operation. Instead, she happily shared more stories about her life at the university library. The eccentric, tenure-track professor who always returned his books with delicately pressed flowers tucked between the pages, and her own quiet, deep passion for literature. Flynn listened intently, asking follow-up questions that demonstrated he was truly engaged, not just waiting for his turn to speak. By the time their main courses arrived, they had effortlessly covered an astonishing range of topics, everything from their favorite childhood books to their most painfully embarrassing college moments. "So," Kira said, as they shared a perfectly textured tiramisu for dessert, "tell me one thing about yourself that would genuinely surprise me." Flynn took a thoughtful sip of his espresso. "Considering, I build furniture in my spare time. Nothing terribly professional or fancy, just simple pieces, tables, a few custom bookshelves. There's something incredibly satisfying about creating something tangible with your hands, especially when the majority of my actual work involves ephemeral deals and endless paperwork." "That is actually really cool," Kira said, genuinely impressed by the unexpected revelation. "I would love to see some of your work sometime." "I'd like that very much," Flynn replied, his eyes warming significantly. "What about you? What revelation would surprise me about the mysterious Kira Lambert?" "I'm writing a children's book," she admitted, leaning closer. "It's a quiet little story about a young girl who discovers a hidden, secret library where all the fictional characters can come out of their books and walk around at night. No one knows about it except my sister." "Now you are making me feel truly inadequate with my amateur carpentry hobby," Flynn teased playfully. "That sounds absolutely amazing, Kira. Are you planning to publish it?" "Maybe someday," she replied. "Right now it's just for me." She had meticulously gathered irrefutable evidence for 2 long months, working carefully and quietly, certain she was doing the morally right thing. But she had been frighteningly naive. Richard Whitfield knew every single step she was taking before she took it. He had expertly arranged every detail of the frame job. And when her office door violently burst open at 9 a.m., it was not her superiors coming for the report, but 2 federal agents holding an arrest warrant. Arya remembered the sudden, cold bite of the handcuffs around her wrists, the sickening clink of the metal echoing loudly through the silent, plush office. She remembered the looks of her colleagues who had once admired her, now staring at her as if she were the lowest form of criminal. She remembered the sudden, accusatory whispers and the murmurs, and most clearly, the triumphant, cold smile on Richard Whitfield's face at the end of the long corridor as she was led away in shame. He had framed her perfectly for embezzling $8 million, using evidence so flawlessly constructed even her highly paid lawyer could not refute it. Arya blinked, pulling herself violently back from the memory. Her tears had long since dried up. She no longer had the emotional strength to cry. She tightened her rough grip on the mop handle, brutally reminding herself that she had no right to collapse. Not now. Not while Lucas desperately needed her. She continued working, meticulously wiping each tile, scrubbing each corner, silently waiting for the single moment she could safely slip into the finance office, recalling the complex keyboard password she had observed a careless junior analyst type in earlier that week, to continue her desperate, secret investigation. An investigation she was terrifyingly unaware was being watched, every single second, by the unblinking, steel-gray eyes of Sebastian Cole. As they prepared to leave the restaurant, Marco insisted on hugging both of them, treating Kira like an old family friend rather than a new acquaintance. Outside, the night air was clear and cool, with a surprising number of stars visible despite the ambient city lights. "It's still early," Flynn said, his hand lingering near her elbow. "Would you like to walk for a bit? There's a beautiful, quiet park just a few blocks from here." The park was serene, the pathways dimly lit by charming, vintage-style gas lamps. They walked close together, their hands occasionally brushing with electric, hesitant contact, until Flynn gently, deliberately, took her hand in his. The simple, immediate contact sent a profound warmth through Kira that was entirely unrelated to the temperature outside. "Can I ask you something that's been on my mind?" Kira asked, as they paused by a small, bubbling fountain. "Why were you so desperately determined to avoid that setup with Jessica? From the tiny glimpse I had, she seemed perfectly pleasant." Flynn sighed, his breath momentarily misting in the cool air. "It truly wasn't about Jessica, Kira. It was about my mother fundamentally not understanding that I need and want to find someone on my own terms. Someone who—" He paused, his eyes settling on Kira with an intensity that genuinely made her heart catch in her chest. Someone who would spontaneously help a complete stranger hide from his mother in the romance section of a bookstore, just because he looked desperate. Kira laughed softly, the sound tinkling in the quiet night. "So that's your type? Bookstore accomplices?" "Apparently," Flynn said, his voice dropping to a low, husky register as he took a deliberate step closer to her. "Is it all right if I kiss you, Kira?" Instead of answering, Kira closed the remaining distance between them. At 1 o'clock in the morning, Arya stopped for her scheduled break in a deep, dark corner of the corridor on the 20th floor, an area where the security cameras did not quite reach. She sat down heavily on the cold, hard floor with her back pressed against the wall, her legs aching fiercely after 5 hours of continuous standing. She pulled the old, chipped phone from her pocket. The screen was cracked with a long, spidering line running from the upper left corner down the middle, and her heart nearly stopped when she saw 3 missed calls from Dr. Thompson, the renowned cardiologist treating Lucas. No one, she knew, ever called after midnight unless something was profoundly wrong. With trembling, chemical-roughened hands, she called back, each ring stretching into an eternity of dread. Dr. Thompson answered immediately, his voice low and gravely serious, saying he had just reviewed Lucas's latest test results, and the situation was far worse than expected. The boy's heart valve was weakening at an accelerated rate, and without specialized replacement surgery within the next 3 months, his fragile heart would not be able to endure the strain much longer. Arya bit her lip until she tasted blood and forced her voice to remain steady as she asked the fatal question. The cost. The number Dr. Thompson named was like a knife driven brutally into her chest. $300,000, which covered the surgery itself, recovery time, medication, and long-term monitoring. And because Arya was currently awaiting trial on high-level embezzlement charges, no insurance company in the country would accept her, and no medical assistance program would come close to covering the staggering $300,000. At a janitor's wage of $12 an hour, she would have to work without eating or sleeping for more than 10 relentless years to earn that total amount. And Lucas had only 90 days. Dr. The kiss was initially gentle, a tentative exploration, but it quickly deepened with a powerful warmth that seemed to spread through her entire body, lighting her up from the inside out. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Kira felt as though something vital and fundamental had shifted permanently in her world. "I've been wanting to do that since you found me hiding behind that shelf," Flynn admitted, resting his forehead against hers. "Even though you probably thought I might be a serial killer, or at the very least severely unbalanced. Especially then," he corrected, smiling widely. "You were very convincing with that architectural history story." They walked back to Flynn's car hand in hand, the conversation flowing easily between teasing banter and more genuine, serious topics about life goals and family. By the time he drove her home, Kira felt as though she had known Flynn for years, rather than just a few short days. At her apartment door, Flynn kissed her again, more briefly this time, but with a palpable promise of much more to come. "I'd like to see you again soon. Very soon." "I'd like that too," Kira replied, once again surprising herself with the depth of her immediate conviction. What followed was a whirlwind 2 weeks of dating that managed to feel both incredibly exciting and perfectly comfortable at the same time. Flynn introduced her to intimate art galleries, several other hidden gem restaurants, and even a smoky, small jazz club where they danced closely until midnight. Kira reciprocated, showing him her favorite independent bookstores, taking him on a private, after-hours tour of the university library, and introducing him to her secret writing spot within the peaceful botanical gardens. What Kira couldn't quite figure out, however, was the precise nature of Flynn's work. Thompson added that he was deeply sorry, that he wished he could intervene, but the hospital had rigid financial rules and could not proceed with the life-saving surgery without guaranteed financial assurance. Arya swallowed hard, feeling as though she had swallowed a burning piece of coal, and then said with astonishing, terrifying calm that she understood, and she would find a way, and asked only for time. After the call disconnected, Arya stared numbly at the black screen of the phone, and the meticulously constructed wall she had built over the past 3 agonizing years to hold back despair began to violently crack. She thought of her parents, of the sudden car accident 9 years earlier that had taken both of them in a single devastating night. She remembered the call from the police at 3 o'clock in the morning. Remembered Lucas's inconsolable crying when she told him their parents would never, ever come home. She had been 19, just starting her second year of college. And suddenly, she had to become mother, father, and provider everything to a terrified, grieving 9-year-old child. She had immediately taken a year off school to stabilize their lives, worked 3 brutal jobs simultaneously to pay the rent and care for Lucas, then returned to night classes while still working tirelessly during the day. She had graduated at the top of her class, not because she was inherently smarter than others, but because she recognized she had no right to fail. Lucas needed her to succeed. Lucas needed her to be impossibly strong, and she had done it, until Richard Whitfield viciously destroyed everything. Now, sitting hunched in the dark corner of a building that belonged to someone else, Arya looked down at her hands under the dim emergency light. He was obviously successful. His clothes were expensive, though always understated, and he never displayed any anxiety about money, but he remained curiously vague about the specific details of his real estate development job. He mentioned abstract concepts like projects and meetings, but never named specific companies or structures. It wasn't until their 3rd weekend together that Kira started to truly understand why. They were walking through a particularly historic section of downtown when Flynn stopped abruptly in front of a massive construction site where an elegant, aging building was undergoing extremely careful renovation. "This is one of mine," he said quietly, a distinct note of pride evident in his voice as he gazed up at the partially completed structure. "We're converting it into mixed-use space, affordable housing units on the upper floors, local businesses on the ground level, and we've preserved virtually all the original architectural details." "One of yours?" Kira repeated, genuinely confused. "I thought you simply worked for a development company." Flynn looked suddenly and deeply uncomfortable. "I do, in a way. I own Parker Developments." Kira blinked, processing the magnitude of the information drop. "Parker Developments? As in, the massive firm that is currently renovating half the downtown waterfront? That Parker Developments?" Flynn nodded slowly, watching her reaction with palpable anxiety. "I should have been much clearer from the very beginning. I genuinely apologize." "So you're not just in real estate development," Kira said slowly, connecting the dots. "You are a... what? A multi-millionaire developer?" "That would be an accurate description," Flynn admitted, looking truly worried about how she would integrate this news. Does that change things for you?" Kira paused, taking a long moment to think. Did it change things? These fingers, which had once typed intricate analyses of transactions worth millions of dollars, which had signed reports capable of shifting entire financial markets, were now red and painfully cracked from scrubbing floors and toilets. Her nails had not been painted in a very long time, and the pervasive, chemical smell of detergent seemed permanently embedded into every line of her fingerprints. But Arya did not cry. She had cried too much in the first months following her arrest. Cried until there were literally no tears left. Now, she felt only a cold, terrible resolve rising rapidly inside her. 3 months. A trial that could send her to prison for 20 years. And a brother slowly dying because there was no money to save him. She had no right to give up. She had no right to fall apart. She had to keep fighting. Had to find the definitive proof of her innocence. Had to expose Richard Whitfield before he completely succeeded in destroying her life, and tragically Lucas's. Arya stood up, decisively wiping her dry eyes, though no tears had actually fallen, and pushed her cleaning cart toward the elevator. Tonight, immediately after finishing her legitimate work, she would slip back into the finance office to continue tracing Richard Whitfield's dirty money, the only lead she had left. She did not know that several floors above, Sebastian Cole was sitting in the cold darkness of his office, watching her live feed on the security cameras and patiently waiting to see what she would do next. Sebastian sat entirely alone in his private office on the 40th floor, the only light illuminating the room coming from the massive computer screen directly in front of him. It was already well past 2 o'clock in the morning, and the Blackstone Empire was wrapped in a deep, insulated silence, but he had no intention whatsoever of going home. The Flynn she had come to know over the past 14 days was thoughtful, reliably funny, and surprisingly grounded. He listened intently when she spoke, remembered minute details about her preferences, and never, ever made her feel anything less than completely valued. "No," she said finally, meeting his gaze. "It absolutely doesn't change how I feel about you, the person. But I am intensely curious why you weren't upfront about this from the start." Flynn ran a nervous hand through his hair, a gesture she now recognized as a definite sign of internal stress. When people discover the scale of the money and the name, it immediately changes how they perceive me. Some suddenly want something from me. Others instantly make unwarranted assumptions about the kind of shallow person I must be. I desperately wanted you to get to know me, just me, before the CEO of Parker Developments entered the picture. Kira found she could easily understand that fear. Well, for what it's worth, I genuinely liked Flynn, the bookshelf-hiding real estate guy. And I still like Flynn, the millionaire developer. But no more big, fundamental secrets. Agreed? A wave of visible relief washed over his face. No more secrets. Promise. He took her hand, squeezing it reassuringly. And just for the record, Parker Developments is worth significantly more than a few million. But I think that conversation can wait for another, less shocking day. Kira's eyes widened slightly at the clarification, but she decided to take this further revelation completely in stride. "Okay, Mr. Big Shot Developer, why don't you show me around your project here? I want to see what all the fuss is truly about." Flynn's face instantly lit up with genuine enthusiasm as he began explaining the intricate renovation process, pointing out the preserved original features and the specific innovations they had incorporated. On the screen, Arya Bennett's image appeared in sharp, high definition through the highly specialized cameras he had personally installed throughout the building. He watched her push the cleaning cart into the service elevator, watched her wipe each office with mechanical, robotic motions, watched her sit down heavily in the dark corner of the corridor, and stare intently at her phone. He could not hear the conversation, but he saw the way her shoulders sagged suddenly, the way her hands trembled violently around the device, the way she bit her lip as if physically trying to hold back a catastrophic collapse. Sebastian meticulously rewound the footage by a full month and watched Arya's behavior night after night, again and again. He had been performing this intense analysis for hours, dissecting every minute detail with the same relentless focus he reserved only for his most dangerous, high-stakes enemies. And the more he watched, the more he felt a growing, powerful certainty that something was profoundly wrong with his initial standard assumption. If Arya were a spy working for Moretti, how would she logically act? Sebastian had dealt with dozens of traitors over his 10 years of absolute rule, and he knew their specific patterns intimately. A professional spy would move in quickly and exit swiftly, copy the crucial data in a matter of minutes, and vanish without leaving a trace. They would constantly alter their schedule to avoid developing a detectable pattern. They would have multiple contingency escape plans if suspected. But Arya was completely, frustratingly different. She entered the finance office at the exact same time every single night, between 2:30 and 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the morning. She stayed far too long typing, not just copying. Her desperation was palpable, yet her actions were methodical. Sebastian watched her, his attention fixed on her tired but intense face, searching for the crack in the logic. morning as if following a fixed internal clock. His passion for the work was clearly evident, and Kira found herself even more attracted to him, watching him talk about something he clearly loved so deeply. As the weeks continued to pass, Kira and Flynn's relationship deepened, evolving far beyond the initial, thrilling novelty. He gradually began to introduce her to his world, starting with quiet dinners with business associates, where she discovered he wasn't just respected, but genuinely liked by his employees. Then to charity events where she learned about his substantial but carefully quiet philanthropic work, and eventually he introduced her to his home. Flynn's house was not at all what Kira had anticipated. Instead of a sterile, sleek penthouse or an ostentatious mansion, it was a beautifully renovated historic home nestled in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. It was large, yes, but not showy. It was filled with overflowing bookshelves, many of the furnishings he had built himself, and an obvious, deep appreciation for true craftsmanship over disposable luxury. "This truly feels like you," Kira said as he showed her around, running her hand along a handsome, solid bookshelf he had crafted from reclaimed wood. "That," Flynn replied, pulling her close for a warm kiss, "is the best compliment you could possibly give me." It was during a quiet dinner at his house one evening, about 2 months into their exclusive relationship, that Flynn's phone began buzzing repeatedly with his mother's easily recognizable ringtone. "I should probably take this," he said apologetically, glancing down at the caller ID. "She'll just continue to call until I do." Kira nodded, sipping her wine as Flynn answered the call. She could only hear his side of the conversation, but it was immediately clear that his mother was once again in aggressive matchmaking mode. "Mother, I've told you," Flynn began, then sighed heavily in exasperation. "No, I absolutely do not want to meet Charles's daughter because I am actively seeing someone." She did not hurriedly copy data, nor did she appear to be scrambling to complete a task. Instead, she sat for hours at the computer, typing continuously, her eyes fixed on the illuminated screen with a terrifying, almost inhuman focus. Sebastian zoomed in on her face through the high-definition camera feed. That was not the face of a spy or a thief sneaking illicit information. It was the face of someone utterly absorbed in work, solving an intricate, consuming problem, searching relentlessly for a critical missing piece. He checked other camera angles and reviewed her movements over the entirety of the last month. She had made no contact with anyone suspicious inside the towering Blackstone building. She did not meet anyone outside of her work hours. Not a soul. There was absolutely no digital trace or physical sign of her transferring information to an outside party. She arrived for her shift, cleaned, accessed the finance system, went home, and that was the sum total of her existence recorded by his empire's vast surveillance network. Sebastian opened Arya Bennett's employee file, a document so sparse it felt like an administrative accident. It was thin, containing only the most basic, bare-bones information. 28 years old, a modest address in Queens. No emergency contact listed except for one name, Lucas Bennett, identified simply as her younger brother. No education history was listed, and 0 prior employment was recorded anywhere. She was like a phantom, a ghost who had materialized from thin air and accepted a minimum-wage janitorial job 3 years earlier. That blank slate only served to fuel the fire of Sebastian's suspicion. Someone without a past was almost always someone running from a severe, inescapable consequence. But if she were truly running, why would she risk accessing the protected computers of a major mafia organization? Yes, seriously. No, it's not a work thing. He glanced over at Kira with an amused, exasperated expression. Actually, yes, you have sort of met her. She was at the bookstore that day. No, mother, not Jessica. The other woman. The one who was looking for the obscure architecture book. Yes, that was a setup, but not the way you think it was. Flynn paused, listening patiently for a moment. Then his expression softened considerably. I would love for you to meet her properly, mother. Dinner next Sunday. I'll ask her right now. After hanging up, Flynn rejoined Kira at the table. So that was my mother. She would like to meet you properly this time, not while you are creating sophisticated diversions in public bookstores. Does she know that I was your willing accomplice in escaping her setup? Kira asked, highly amused by the scenario. She does now, he confirmed. Apparently, she thought you were incredibly clever and quick-witted with your architectural history queries. She's already decided, already impressed. Flynn took her hand across the table, his thumb tracing the curve of her knuckle. You don't have to say yes, he murmured, his gaze serious. My mother can be intense. She views these dinners as strategic campaigns, not casual meals. I'd love to meet her, Kira said, surprised to find the truth ringing in her voice. It wasn't just curiosity. She felt a sudden, fierce desire to fully integrate into his world. After all, I should thank her. If she hadn't tried to set you up with Jessica, we never would have met. Flynn's smile was warm, a deep, comfortable crinkle around his eyes as he leaned across the table, oblivious to the other diners, to kiss her. Have I mentioned lately that I'm falling in love with you? The words, spoken so simply yet with profound certainty, sent a clean, thrilling jolt through Kira. They hadn't exchanged the full declaration of I love you yet, though she'd been carrying the weight of the feeling in her chest for weeks. The question circled endlessly, a toxic drone in Sebastian's brilliant, analytical mind, and he despised the searing frustration of not having the definitive answer. He moved the footage forward to tonight and watched Arya end the silent phone call in the dark corridor. He saw the way she sat motionless for a long time, shoulders stooped and curved as if bearing an invisible, oppressive weight, the weight of the world, or perhaps just her world. Then she stood, and a strange, cold determination was etched onto her tired face. There was something in her eyes, a look Sebastian recognized instantly because he had once carried it himself. It was the absolute desperation of someone who had nothing left to lose, yet still fought with every fiber of her being for something infinitely more important than herself. Daniel Mercer, Sebastian's second-in-command, had suggested the quick, brutal approach. Arrest her, interrogate her, torture her if necessary until she broke and confessed her allegiance. That was the organization's usual, highly effective method for traitors. But Sebastian had refused, not because he was soft, he was never soft, his reputation ensured that, but because he demanded the truth before he acted. Torture could make people say anything to escape pain, but it was rarely, if ever, the reliable truth. Sebastian turned off the screen, the sudden silence of the command center amplifying the hum of the cooling systems. He leaned back in his chair and looked out at the massive glass wall. Manhattan glittered below, an infinite carpet of black diamonds and corrupted light, but he did not register its power or its beauty. He saw only questions shimmering in the light pollution. Who exactly was Arya Bennett? What was she desperately searching for? Who was pulling her strings? And why was she risking everything? He could not stop thinking about the haunting, wounded intensity of her amber eyes. Sebastian stood up abruptly. The decision was made, cold and absolute. No, you haven't mentioned that, but it's good to hear because I'm falling in love with you, too. The dinner with Flynn's mother the following Sunday went surprisingly, even theatrically, well. Evelyn Parker was indeed intense. She commanded the room with sharp intelligence and a formidable designer suit. But she was also genuinely warm and zeroed in on Kira's work at the university library with focused interest. She didn't condescend. She asked incisive questions about collection development and student outreach. By the end of the evening, she had completely disarmed Kira, pulling out old leather-bound photo albums and showing Kira Flynn's baby pictures, complete with stories about his childhood attempts at home improvement. One memorable tale involved a toddler Flynn and a small hammer, which had once resulted in an accidentally dismantled dining room table, a casualty of his early, aggressive renovation phase. I knew from the moment I saw you in that bookstore that you were special, Evelyn confided in a low, conspiratorial voice as Flynn went to the kitchen to fetch coffee. She squeezed Kira's hand. The way you manufactured that entire story about architectural books on the spot, creative and quick thinking. Exactly what my Flynn needs. I thought you were trying to set him up with Jessica, Kira said, genuinely confused, the pieces of their origin story suddenly shifting. Evelyn waved her hand dismissively, the gesture elegant and practiced. Jessica was never right for him, too concerned with status and appearances. I just needed Flynn to start thinking seriously about settling down, about making the effort to escape. Sometimes a mother has to create a little motivation. Are you saying you engineered that whole scene, knowing he'd run and potentially bump into someone else? Kira asked, beginning to wonder if she had wildly underestimated Evelyn Parker, who suddenly seemed less a society matriarch and more a master strategist. Tomorrow night, he would not sit here watching cameras like a remote overlord. He would follow the mysterious cleaning woman himself, wherever she went after leaving the Blackstone Empire, and he would find the answers with his own eyes, up close. The following night, Sebastian did not sit in his soundproof office watching the endless feeds as he usually did. Instead, he parked his black Maybach S-Class in a deep, shadowed corner of the underground garage on the second level, a position that allowed him a perfect, unobstructed view of the employee exit without drawing any attention to his vehicle. He had turned off his phone, declined all appointments for the evening, and tersely informed Daniel that he had a private, sensitive matter to handle that night. The most powerful Mafia boss on the East Coast, a man accustomed to commanding attention and wielding lethal influence, sat alone in the expensive solitude of the dark, waiting patiently for a cleaning woman to finish her minimum-wage shift. He found himself utterly perplexed by his own actions. The clock on the Maybach's dashboard read 5:45 in the cold morning when the side door of the building hissed open and Arya Bennett stepped outside. She was still wearing the dark blue janitor's uniform, visibly worn and faded, with a worn canvas backpack slung over one shoulder. Her posture was tired, bone-deep exhausted, yet strangely, fiercely upright, like someone who had long ago decided she would refuse to bend or break under the strain. Sebastian watched her cross the vast, echoing garage with quick, practiced steps toward the far corner, where the older, cheaper employee cars were parked, deliberately segregated from the executive's pristine area. Her car made him frown, a deep, annoyed crease forming between his brows. It was an ancient Honda Civic at least 15 years past its prime. The original silver paint was faded almost to a dull gray, peeling in ragged patches on the doors and hood. Let's just say I wasn't surprised when he disappeared around the corner, Evelyn replied, her blue eyes sparkling with a knowing wink. Flynn thinks he's so clever, but he's exactly like his father. Henry used to hide from my mother's setups too, until the day he didn't. Some things skip a generation, but not everything. When Flynn returned with the coffee tray, he found Kira and his mother laughing together, the easy familiarity of old friends hanging in the air. Should I be worried? He asked, setting down the tray with a bewildered expression. Very, they replied in unison, causing another burst of laughter that echoed through the otherwise quiet Parker dining room. As their relationship approached the 6-month mark, Kira and Flynn settled into a comfortable, deeply satisfying rhythm. She kept her small apartment as a sanctuary for solitude and writing, but she stayed at his sprawling, quiet house most nights. Their joint life was structured around sweet traditions. The chaos of Sunday morning trips to the farmer's market, Wednesday evening cooking experiments, some disastrous, some Michelin-worthy, and quiet Saturdays spent reading companionably, curled up on matching leather chairs in his vast, book-lined home library. Flynn's work remained demanding, requiring transatlantic calls and focused intensity, but he made Kira an unquestionable priority. He often surprised her with spontaneous lunch deliveries at the university library or tiny, folded post-it notes hidden in her bag or inside her books with messages that made her smile throughout the day. Reminders that he was thinking of her even when miles away. Kira eventually introduced Flynn to her small circle of friends, a group of academics, artists, and perpetually struggling writers. A large, ugly dent marred the front fender, a sign that it had once been badly hit and never afforded the luxury of repair. When Arya started the engine, the sound groaned through the empty concrete garage like the tormented sigh of an aging, beaten creature forcing itself through one more impossible day. Sebastian waited until her pathetic taillights disappeared around the ramp before starting his own powerful engine. Maintaining a distance of exactly 3 cars, he began the follow. Arya drove east, quickly leaving behind the glittering, obscene center of Manhattan with its glass skyscrapers and high-end luxury stores, and heading instead into the dense, lesser-known expanse of Queens, crossing the East River via the Queensboro Bridge. Sebastian immediately felt the profound, physical shift in scenery as they ventured deeper into the outer borough. The wide, immaculate avenues and clean streets of Manhattan gave way to narrower roads, cracked sidewalks, walls saturated with layered graffiti, and small, struggling shops with faded signs often printed in Spanish or Chinese. This was a section of New York City Sebastian rarely, if ever, entered, the essential, invisible world of low-income workers, of vast, extended families crowded into small, deteriorating apartments, of the American dream crushed and fragmented by the grinding reality of existence. Arya finally stopped in front of a small, nondescript pharmacy on a grimy street corner. The sign above the door read Martinez Pharmacy, with smaller, hand-painted letters advertising the lowest prices in the area. Sebastian parked half a block away, sliding deep into the shadows and lowering his window slightly to observe. The cleaning woman went inside, and through the dusty glass, he could see her standing at the counter speaking with an elderly, kind-looking pharmacist. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Sebastian grew restive, irritation stirring in his gut. They were initially intimidated by his polished manner and obvious wealth, sensing the weight of his reputation. But they were quickly won over by his genuine interest in their lives and his unreserved willingness to join their tradition of fiercely competitive board game nights. It was on one such game night, after Flynn and Kira had soundly defeated everyone at a particularly high-stakes round of Pictionary, that her friend Marcus pulled her aside, a half-empty wine glass in his hand. "He's not what I expected," Marcus admitted, watching Flynn expertly clear the snack table. "When you said he was some hot-shot developer, I thought he'd be a jerk," Kira supplied with a knowing smile. "Pretty much, but he's actually great. He listens. And he looks at you, Kira, like you're the most fascinating person he's ever met, like you hold all the secrets of the universe in your smile." "The feeling is mutual," Kira replied, her gaze drifting across the room where Flynn was laughing with her other friends, completely at ease, integrating seamlessly into the life she had built before him. Later that night, as they walked arm-in-arm back to Flynn's classic car, the cool night air refreshing after the intense game, he squeezed her hand tighter. "I've been thinking," he said, his tone deliberately casual, but with an undercurrent of nervousness that instantly caught her attention and made her heart pick up speed. "Dangerous," Kira teased, slowing their steps. "What about? About how much I love waking up next to you, and how empty, how completely cavernous my house feels on the nights you're not there." Flynn stopped walking completely and turned to face her, the yellow glow of a nearby streetlight illuminating the seriousness in his eyes. "Move in with me. Officially, I mean." Kira's breath hitched. "Are you sure? It's a big step." "I've never been more sure of anything," Flynn said, reaching out to cup her face in his hands. "I love you, Kira." He could not comprehend why the simple act of buying medicine would necessitate such a ridiculous delay. Then he saw what happened next, and it was a sight that made his chest constrict in a sudden, sharp way he had absolutely not expected. Arya pulled a small, worn, fabric-covered wallet from her pocket and proceeded to empty its contents onto the counter surface. Not bills, only coins. Piles of dull, mixed coins that she meticulously counted one by one, stacking them into small, uneven columns on the glass surface while the pharmacist waited with infinite patience, as if this sight were a common, painful ritual. Sebastian watched her count and recount, saw her shoulders tense painfully when the total seemed insufficient, saw her frantically search her worn backpack again for a few more loose coins, and then saw the brief, fragile relief cross her tired face when she finally gathered enough change to receive the small, paper bag of medicine from the pharmacist's hand. This was not the calculated behavior of an operative, a wealthy spy making money from selling priceless secrets. This was the desperate behavior of someone living day to day, moment to moment, relying on her very last coins for survival. Sebastian had witnessed horrific things in his life: death, profound betrayal, the heights of human cruelty. But he had never seen someone count coppers to buy necessary medication and still maintain such a proud, ramrod-straight posture. She did not beg, did not try to elicit pity, did not drop her eyes. She simply paid for what she desperately needed with the exact little she had. Arya left the pharmacy, clutching the small bag of medicine as if it were a fragile, precious treasure. She got back into her rickety car and drove on, utterly unaware that the black Maybach was following quietly behind her, and that the man inside was no longer looking at her with eyes of pure, cold suspicion alone. Arya did not drive home, as Sebastian had logically expected. "I want to build a life with you, starting with just sharing a morning routine." "I love you, too," she replied, rising onto her tiptoes in the shadow of the light post to kiss him deeply. "And yes, I'll move in with you." The move happened gradually over the next few weeks, a process less of combining possessions and more of creating space. Flynn cleared out an entire section of his master closet for her clothes and gave Kira an entire sun-drenched, second-floor room to serve as her private library and writing studio. One weekend, when she returned from visiting her parents, he surprised her with a magnificent, custom-built desk that fit perfectly into the bay window overlooking the blooming garden. The wood was rich, dark walnut, smoothed and polished to a satin finish. "So you can finally focus on your children's book," he explained, watching as she ran her hands reverently over the smooth surface. "I want you to have a space that is entirely, unequivocally yours." It was in that room, bathed in soft afternoon light, 6 months later, that Flynn proposed. It wasn't a grand, public gesture or an elaborate setup. It happened on a rainy Sunday morning as they sat together reading. Kira immersed in her manuscript, Flynn reviewing complicated zoning plans for a new city development. "I just realized something," Flynn said, setting down his architectural papers, his voice quiet. "What's that?" Kira asked, still focused on editing a tricky paragraph on her laptop. "I've been hiding from my mother's setups my entire adult life. And then I meet you, the woman I want to spend the rest of my life with, while hiding from one of those very setups." That made Kira look up, closing her laptop with a decisive click. "Are you saying your mother was right all along? Because I'm not sure my ego can handle that fact." Flynn laughed, the sound warm and genuine, and he moved immediately to kneel beside her chair, shifting the comfortable weight of his presence closer. Instead, the old Honda Civic continued deeper into the dense east side of Queens, through streets that became visibly more worn and neglected with each passing block. The roads were lined with stark red brick houses built in the 1940s, featuring barred windows and cracked concrete steps. Sebastian increased the distance, understanding that his Maybach was far too conspicuous here, looking like a flawless diamond dropped carelessly among a bed of gravel. Arya finally stopped in front of an old 2-story building on a corner. Its brick walls were faded and stained by time and pollution. Its iron awning was visibly rusted, and a weathered wooden sign above the door read, "East Side Community Center," in peeling, faded blue paint. Sebastian parked nearly a full block away, where the early morning shadows still lingered and watched through his tinted windshield. Arya stepped out of the car, and the very first thing he noticed was the profound way she straightened her spine, her shoulders opening as if an invisible, immense burden had been physically set down the very moment she arrived at this place. She pushed the heavy door open and went inside. Through the dusty, opaque windows, Sebastian could faintly see a large, open space filled with old wooden tables, mismatched plastic chairs, and a large whiteboard fixed to the far wall. A middle-aged woman with thick black hair tied tightly in a bun, a round figure, and a noticeably warm, welcoming smile came from behind the reception counter to greet Arya. Sebastian saw the woman embrace her, tightly, like a long-lost, cherished daughter, and Arya returned the hug just as fiercely, her face resting against the woman's shoulder with a sense of utter peace he had never once seen on the surveillance footage. They spoke briefly, their exchange appearing quick and familiar, and then Arya disappeared toward the back of the building, presumably to prepare something. "I'm saying that sometimes the best things happen when you're actively trying to avoid them. And finding you, Kira, that's the single best thing that has ever happened to me." He reached into the inner pocket of his robe and pulled out a small, navy velvet box, which felt heavy and significant in his palm. "I've had this for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. But I just realized that every single mundane moment with you is perfect. Kira Lambert, will you marry me?" The ring was stunning. An antique, deeply personal design with a brilliant center diamond surrounded by smaller, perfectly cut stones that caught the dim morning light streaming through the rain-streaked window. "Yes," Kira said, tears immediately filling her eyes as Flynn gently slipped the ring onto her finger. 1,000 times. Yes. They were married the following spring in the city's botanical gardens, the same lush, verdant sanctuary where Kira had taken Flynn on one of their earliest, tentative dates. It was a relatively small, intimate wedding by the standards of the Parker family's social circle, focused solely on family and close friends. Evelyn Parker sat beaming in the front row, looking absolutely triumphant, as if the whole beautiful thing had been her meticulously crafted plan all along. At the reception, Flynn's best man, Henry, toasted the couple with a knowing smile and a sly dig at the groom. To Flynn and Kira, proof that sometimes, hiding in the dusty corner of a quiet bookstore is the best career move a self-respecting millionaire can possibly make. Later, as they danced under strings of glittering lights laced through the garden trees, Flynn pulled Kira close, resting his chin on her hair. "Happy?" he asked softly, the music a gentle pulse around them. "Completely," she replied, resting her head on his shoulder, inhaling the familiar scent of his expensive cologne and comfort. "Though I'm still waiting for you to thank me properly for saving you from that blind date." About 15 minutes later, young people began to arrive in small groups, entering the center with the sleepy, reluctant faces of those who were awake far too early on a weekend morning. Sebastian counted roughly 12 to 15 of them, mostly teenagers between 14 and 18, dressed simply, some carrying backpacks as if heading to a mundane school day. They were of every background imaginable: black, brown, Asian, white. A small, immediate portrait of children growing up on the poorer, overlooked edges of New York. And then Sebastian saw what made him physically lean forward, his steel-gray eyes widening slightly in genuine surprise. Arya emerged from the back room, and she was no longer the exhausted cleaning woman he had watched for weeks. She still wore the dark blue uniform, and her hair was still tied up simply, but everything else about her had shifted. Her back was now rigid and straight like a military officer. Her steps were confident and precise, and her amber eyes were lit with an electric fire he had never witnessed. She stood before the teenagers not as a peer, but as a seasoned teacher before a captive class. And the most astonishing detail was how the students looked at her. Not with boredom or teenage indifference, but with absolute, genuine respect and full attention, as if every word she was about to speak held crucial, life-altering importance. The middle-aged woman, whom Sebastian now guessed was the center's manager, stood quietly in the corner, watching the scene unfold with a look of fierce pride. Arya said something, and the group burst into relaxed, communal laughter, breaking the tension. They then sat down at the tables, which were arranged in a U-shape facing the whiteboard. Arya picked up a marker and began to write, and Sebastian strained to read the faint text through the dirty glass. Flynn's laugh vibrated warmly against her ear. "I think I just promised you my entire life and fortune, Kira. Isn't that thanks enough?" "Almost," Kira said with a slow, contented smile. "But I think I'll keep coming up with creative ways for you to show your gratitude for the next 50 years or so." "That sounds perfect to me," Flynn replied, pulling her into a long, secure kiss as the music played on and their future stretched before them, bright with promise, deep commitment, and the sweet surprise of unexpected joy. 1 year later, Kira's children's book, The Architect Who Loved Stories, was published to critical acclaim, featuring vibrant illustrations by a renowned artist Flynn had quietly connected her with months before. 2 years after that, they welcomed twins, a boy and a girl, who would grow up surrounded by books in the strong, beautiful home their father had built and their mother had filled with stories. And sometimes when people asked how they met, Flynn would simply say, "She rescued me in a bookstore," and Kira would always add with a luminous smile, "And he's been thanking me ever since." He could only make out vague shapes of complex numbers, charts, and words like budget, interest rate, investment, all written in a clear, steady, expert handwriting. The night shift cleaning woman was actively teaching advanced finance to disadvantaged teenagers on a weekend morning. Sebastian sat motionless in the luxurious car, attempting to brutally process the cognitive dissonance of what he had just witnessed. He had prepared for 100 sinister possibilities. That she was meeting a Moretti rival contact. That she was passing critical information to an enemy organization. That she was a planted spy meant to destabilize and destroy his financial empire from within. But he had utterly failed to prepare for this. A mysterious cleaning woman who slipped into a Mafia finance office at night to steal computer resources, only to wake up early and teach forgotten children for free. Something did not fit in this picture, a critical piece was missing, and Sebastian decided then and there that he needed to look closer, much closer, to find the actual devastating truth. Sebastian waited another 10 minutes, meticulously scanning the area to be certain no one was paying unusual attention to the out-of-place luxury car in this poor neighborhood. Then he stepped out. He had strategically removed his bespoke jacket and tie, wearing only a high-quality black shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal his muscular forearms, trying to look less like a feared mafia boss and more like an ordinary, though intimidating, civilian. He walked briskly to the community center, gently pushed the front door open, and went inside. The middle-aged woman at the reception desk looked up at him with frank curiosity, but thankfully zero suspicion, and asked if she could help him. Sebastian said calmly that he had heard there were free educational classes offered here and wanted to take a look around. The woman introduced herself as Rosa Martinez, the center's manager, and smiled widely, saying he had arrived at the perfect time because Miss Bennett's important class had just begun, pointing him toward the large room at the end of the hall. Sebastian nodded his cold thanks and followed her direction. But instead of entering the classroom, he stopped just short, retreating into a dark corner of the corridor where he could observe without being seen or heard. From this concealed vantage point, he had a perfect view into the room, and what he saw made him literally freeze in place. Arya stood commandingly at the whiteboard, holding a blue marker, drawing a complex chart of financial curves and arrows overlapping each other. She was explaining the terrifying mechanics of compound interest and how major banks and credit companies used seemingly harmless small numbers to trap unsuspecting consumers in endless, generational cycles of debt. Her voice was now clear, compelling, and authoritative. It was not the dry, rote tone of someone who knew only abstract theory, but the voice of someone who had truly worked deep within the financial field, who had seen these numbers operate and destroy lives in reality, who understood their devastating power and their hidden danger. She used sharp, real-world examples the teenagers could immediately grasp. A credit card clothing store offered with a tempting 20% discount, but carrying a ruinous 27% annual interest rate. A low-interest car loan with intentionally hidden fees that inflated the cost outrageously. The precise marketing tricks financial companies used to deceive the poor and the uninformed. Sebastian recognized instantly that this was not the knowledge base of someone who had taught herself via online tutorials or read a few basic books. This was the highly specialized knowledge of a professional, someone formerly trained with deep, real-world experience in high finance. The way she broke down complex concepts into simple, immediate language. The intuitive way she anticipated students' complex questions before they even asked them. The way she seamlessly connected disparate financial ideas into a coherent, dangerous whole, all demonstrated a level of expertise that took years of intensive study and high-stakes work to achieve. A girl named Maria, about 16 years old, with long black hair and intensely intelligent eyes, raised her hand to ask how to recognize the elaborate financial scams spreading rapidly on social media platforms. Arya smiled, set the marker down, and sat casually on the edge of the desk, explaining the warning signs as if telling a cautionary story to close friends. She spoke about promises of unusually high returns, the intense pressure to decide immediately, the critical necessity of checking company information through official regulatory sources, and how scammers expertly exploited human greed and human fear. She gave a chilling, specific example of a Ponzi scheme she had once seen collapse, without saying where or when, but with such immediate, granular detail that Sebastian knew the experience was absolutely real. The lesson continued with a practical exercise in personal budgeting. Arya handed out sheets featuring scenario exercises, asking the students to meticulously plan the spending for a hypothetical young worker earning minimum wage. She walked around the room, stopping patiently at each table, guiding each struggling student with endless, gentle patience. Sebastian saw her bend down to eye level with a boy who was clearly struggling, her voice soft and encouraging instead of critical. She did not teach from above, like an infallible authority, but like an older sister or trusted friend, sharing crucial survival knowledge with younger, vulnerable siblings. At the end of the 3-hour class, Arya opened a large, duffel-style bag she had brought from the car and began handing out refurbished old laptops to students who had successfully completed the basic financial course. Sebastian's jaw tightened. He recognized them instantly. They were machines retired from Blackstone Empire's finance division. High-end, expensive devices that had been deemed obsolete, stored for mandated destruction. She was not stealing confidential data. She was cleverly reusing the organization's discarded waste to provide crucial tools to poor children. Sebastian stood rigid in the hallway shadows, looking at the mysterious cleaning woman with completely new, bewildered eyes. And for the first time in many years, the formidable Mafia boss did not have the faintest idea what he should do next. The class concluded around 9 o'clock in the morning after nearly 3 relentless hours, with Arya standing in front of the students without taking a single rest break. Sebastian had already left his observation point earlier and was waiting in the narrow, rubbish-strewn alley behind the community center, where he rightly guessed Arya would exit to avoid Rosa Martinez's insistence that she stay for breakfast. And he was right. About 20 minutes after the class dispersed, the back door opened quietly and Arya stepped out. Her backpack was noticeably lighter now, having given away all the refurbished laptops. She walked quickly toward her Honda Civic parked at the corner, her head lowered, her shoulders deliberately drawn in as if trying to make herself physically smaller and utterly invisible. But then she stopped suddenly, her back stiffening immediately, her head tilting slightly like a deer catching the faint scent of a predator, a hunter. Sebastian knew instantly that she had sensed him. Her survival instincts were far sharper than his detailed file had suggested. Arya turned slowly, her amber eyes sweeping the dark, constricted alleyway, her right hand already slipping into her backpack and gripping something tightly hidden inside. She did not physically see Sebastian, who was standing beneath the deep shadow of the rusted awning, but she knew absolutely, instinctively, that someone dangerous was there. Her heart instantly raced. Her breath quickened into shallow gasps, and one crippling thought consumed her mind. Richard Whitfield had finally found her. He knew she was investigating him, knew she was gathering evidence, and now he had sent someone cold and professional to silence her forever. Arya pulled the small canister of pepper spray from her bag, the only self-defense weapon she could possibly afford, and started to run toward the safety of her car. But she had taken only a few frantic steps when a figure appeared directly in front of her, blocking the alley's escape route. He stepped out of the shadows like a ghost suddenly taking solid form. The weak, flickering street light fell across his face, and Arya froze, every muscle locking instantly. Not Whitfield's lackey, something immeasurably worse. The features were cold, sharp, and cut like a blade, steel-gray eyes devoid of any recognizable emotion. The faint, barely visible scar running from his temple down his left cheek. The tall, powerful frame dressed simply in a black shirt. Sebastian Cole, the head of Blackstone Empire, the man her fellow janitors whispered about in paralyzing fear, the man whose name alone made hardened armed guards lower their gaze in reverence. She had known Blackstone was not just an ordinary, clean investment firm. She had seen immediate signs of illegal, suspicious activity in the transactions while investigating Whitfield, but she had never, not once, imagined she had stumbled directly into the heavily guarded nest of the genuine Mafia. And now that man was standing barely 6 feet away, blocking her only escape, looking at her like cornered, valuable prey. Sebastian said nothing for several agonizing seconds, only watching her reaction with cold intensity. He saw the sharp flicker of fear in her amber eyes, saw her fingers tighten white-knuckled around the canister of spray. But he also saw something else, something unexpected. She did not panic, did not whimper, did not drop to her knees and beg, did not try to make herself appear pitiful. She simply stood there, back rigidly straight, her eyes meeting his as if measuring an opponent and calculating her pathetic chances of survival. And that raw defiance impressed Sebastian more than he was willing to admit. Finally, he spoke, his voice cold and flat, sharp enough to cut the fragile morning air. "What are you doing in my finance office every night, Miss Bennet?" It was not a question seeking information, but a brutal demand for immediate confession. Arya swallowed hard, her throat instantly dry and bitter. She knew lying was utterly useless. A man like Sebastian Cole did not follow someone himself unless he already possessed sufficient, undeniable proof. She chose to tell a strategic sliver of the truth, hoping it would buy her a few crucial more minutes of life. "I use the computers to teach online classes," she said, her voice trembling slightly, but managing to stay clear. "The computers at the community center are too old and cannot run the specialized software I need. The ones in the finance office are stronger, and no one uses them at night." Sebastian frowned slowly. This partial answer was entirely outside any of his carefully constructed expectations, yet it did not explain everything, not nearly enough. "And the USB drive?" he asked, his tone unchanged, maintaining the lethal neutrality. "What exactly are you copying and taking with you?" Arya fell silent. She could not possibly tell him about her investigation, about meticulously tracing Whitfield's dirty money, about how some of those suspicious, massive transactions seemed chillingly linked to Blackstone itself. If she told him, he would either assume she was investigating his organization and immediately kill her, or assume she simply knew too much and kill her anyway. Either path led to her death tonight. Her agonizing silence Sebastian immediately took as a cold admission of terminal guilt. He stepped closer, until less than a meter of cold air separated them, close enough for her to distinctly smell his expensive, subtle cologne, close enough to see the hard veins standing out on his powerful forearms as he crossed them deliberately over his chest. His voice was gentle now, terrifyingly, silkily gentle. "In my world, Miss Bennet, traitors have only one ending, and they absolutely do not die quickly." Arya felt her blood turn to solid ice in her veins. But she did not step back, did not beg, did not let herself cry. She looked straight into the steel-gray eyes of the absolute Mafia boss. And in that terrifying moment, she decided that if she had to die tonight, she would die with dignity and pride, and not like a trembling, helpless animal before a merciless hunter. Arya drew a deep, ragged breath, forcing herself to forcefully control the frantic rhythm of her heart. She knew she was standing directly in front of death, knew the man before her could end her life right here, right now, without anyone ever finding her. Her body would simply vanish as if she had never existed, and Lucas would wait forever for a sister who would never, ever return. The thought of Lucas pierced her chest like a physical blade, and suddenly the primal fear of dying faded, instantly replaced by a strange, icy calm. She had been mentally ready for this moment for a very long time. Since the day she chose to investigate Richard Whitfield, knowing intimately how dangerous he truly was. Since the day she first slipped into Blackstone's fortress-like finance office, knowing exactly what the consequences of discovery could be. She was not afraid to die. She was only mortally afraid of dying before Lucas was definitively saved. Arya looked straight into Sebastian's uncompromising steel-gray eyes and spoke with a calm that profoundly surprised even herself. "You can kill me. I am not asking you to spare my life because I know that in your world, appeals to mercy are meaningless, utterly futile. But I ask you for one thing, only one thing, before you proceed with whatever execution you have planned." Sebastian offered no response, his expression tightening into a fierce frown, a mixture of professional suspicion warring with a flicker of genuine curiosity. He had witnessed countless reactions to imminent death, endured every type of desperate plea, the humiliating torrent of desperate sobbing, the false piety of promises of eternal subservience, the incoherent cries of fear. Yet, he had never encountered anyone so entirely composed, so strangely, deliberately calm, as the slender young woman standing opposite him. "My brother, Lucas, is 18 years old, and he has a serious congenital heart condition," Arya continued, her voice exhibiting only a minor tremor, yet every syllable was articulated with absolute clarity. "He requires life-saving valve replacement surgery within the next 3 months, or he will certainly die. The required funds are $300,000. I do not possess the money. No one will lend it to me. No insurance company will accept his case." She paused, swallowing hard against the dryness in her throat. before pressing on. If you kill me now, Lucas will be left completely alone. Our grandmother suffers from advanced Alzheimer's and is incapable of caring for him. He will die alone in that wretched, miserable apartment, never knowing why his sister simply vanished. He is only 18, Mr. Cole. He has never harmed a single soul. He has nothing, absolutely nothing, to do with whatever trespasses you believe I have committed. Sebastian felt an unexpected physical sensation. A sharp, striking blow to his chest, as if a fist had momentarily seized his heart. She was not begging for survival. She was strategically maneuvering her own demise, using her life as leverage, not to evade punishment, but to secure the future of another person. Arya held his gaze, her amber eyes seeming to glow fiercely in the encroaching shadows. "I beg you," she reiterated, her voice now a low, fervent whisper. "If you are determined to kill me, ensure Lucas receives that surgery first. Or, if you prefer a different arrangement, grant me 3 months. Just 90 days. I will find a way to earn or acquire the money for my brother, and after that time expires, you can do absolutely anything you wish with me. I will not attempt to escape. I will not contact the authorities. I will not tell a living soul what has transpired here. I swear this upon Lucas's life." Sebastian remained utterly motionless, his steely gray eyes locked on her face as if truly seeing her, perhaps for the very first time. In his mind, an image materialized: Ethan, his 8-year-old son, with his mother's wide, deep-set eyes and the rare, hesitant smile Sebastian would annihilate worlds to protect. He instantly recalled the things he had done to maintain Ethan's safety, the enemies he had summarily executed, the countless laws he had shredded, the moral lines he had long ago trampled underfoot. He would burn the world to ash if it guaranteed his son's breathing for one more day. And now, before him stood a woman driven by the exact same fierce, unyielding protective instinct, directed not toward her own child, but toward the younger brother she had essentially raised since he was a frightened 9-year-old. She did not weep. She did not grovel. She made no attempt to appear pathetic or weak. She merely stood there, her posture rigid and straight, her gaze unwavering, speaking the raw truth and stoically accepting the inevitable consequences. In her amber eyes, there was zero sign of fear for herself, only a frantic, desperate concern for the future of someone else. Sebastian had witnessed incredible displays of power and depravity in his long, dark life, but never anyone quite like this girl. He did not know how long he stood enveloped in the thick, oppressive silence before he finally spoke. His voice retained its familiar icy texture, yet something indefinable had shifted in the harsh light of his eyes. "Get in the car." Arya blinked, completely failing to grasp the command. Sebastian repeated it, his tone hardening to one that permitted no resistance, no debate. "Get into my car, now." She had no idea what he intended, whether this signified a momentary reprieve or merely a delayed execution, but she recognized the stark reality that she had no option but absolute obedience. The sleek black Maybach rolled through the quiet streets of Queens in heavy, suffocating silence. Arya sat rigidly in the rear, her hands tightly clenched into fists in her lap, afraid to make any unnecessary movement. Sebastian sat inches away from her, and though they shared the same space, an invisible, impenetrable wall of danger separated them. He did not utter a single word for the entire journey, simply staring out the window with an expression she could not begin to decipher. That profound, unsettling silence was infinitely more frightening than any shouted threat. Arya did not know their destination, nor what fate he planned for her, but when the car executed a slow turn onto a street she immediately recognized and halted in front of the familiar, dilapidated old building where she and Lucas lived. Her heart felt as though it had completely seized up. He knew her address. He had obviously investigated her already. Sebastian directed the driver to wait, then stepped out of the vehicle and looked back at Arya with eyes that demanded instant compliance. "Take me up to your apartment. I want to see that USB drive." Arya desperately wanted to protest, wanted to warn him that Lucas was inside, and that she would not allow her brother to see her in the company of a dangerous stranger. But she understood her utter lack of authority to refuse. She led Sebastian up the dark, decaying stairwell, where the single overhead light had been broken for a week and no resident had bothered to report it. They passed peeling, stained walls that smelled strongly of damp and mold, finally reaching the tiny apartment at the far end of the fourth-floor corridor. She unlocked the door with hands that trembled uncontrollably and pushed it open, her chest tightening painfully as Sebastian's gaze meticulously swept over her living space. It was a meager, combined living room and kitchen area, one bedroom, one cramped bathroom, walls yellowed with age, and a pronounced water stain blooming on the ceiling courtesy of the upstairs neighbors. The old wooden floors groaned and creaked beneath every footstep, yet everything was spotless and neatly organized. Family photographs were meticulously arranged on the shelf below the ancient television. A small, bright yellow plastic vase sat on the dining table, a futile attempt to infuse color into the pervasive grayness of the space. And on the worn, faded sofa in the corner, Lucas was asleep. Sebastian took in the sight of the thin 18-year-old curled beneath a lightweight blanket, his face alarmingly pale, his lips faintly blue. A small heart monitor rested on the table beside him, its numbers blinking with steady, mechanical persistence. He looked significantly younger than his stated age, as though the chronic illness had stolen the vitality and growth that should have defined his young manhood. In the sleeping face, Sebastian saw Arya's features, the delicate curve of the nose, the distinctive shape of the lips, and he could not prevent his thoughts from returning to Ethan, of how his own son was small and fragile and desperately needed protection, too. Arya raised a finger to her lips, silently pleading for Sebastian to maintain absolute quiet. Then she moved silently into the bedroom and returned holding the small USB flash drive. She handed it to Sebastian without a word and pointed to the battered old laptop positioned on the kitchen table. Sebastian plugged the device in, and what rapidly appeared on the screen caused his gray eyes to widen in genuine astonishment. Hundreds of digital files were meticulously organized into clearly labeled folders. Detailed cash flow charts, complex analyses of suspicious transactions, exhaustive lists of shell companies, hard evidence of forged signatures. Each file was precisely named by date and specific content, and each master folder contained a concise summary explaining the financial connections and implications. This was emphatically not the clumsy effort of an amateur. This was the highly precise, clinical work of a supremely skilled forensic financial analyst who knew exactly what critical data points to seek and where to locate them. Sebastian opened the largest folder, and the name Richard Whitfield was stamped on almost every document. The documented trail of evidence revealed the Morgan Whitfield chief financial officer running an incredibly sophisticated money laundering network, moving vast quantities of illicit capital through dozens of dummy corporations spanning multiple international jurisdictions. But what truly captured Sebastian's focused attention was a smaller folder, innocuously labeled Unidentified Links. He clicked it open, and his heart seemed to momentarily cease beating. The transactions detailed here showed a distinct portion of Whitfield's dirty money flowing directly into a network Sebastian immediately recognized. The complex financial web controlled by Victor Moretti, his sworn and bitter enemy, the man actively attempting to dismantle Blackstone. Richard Whitfield was, in essence, laundering funds for Moretti right under the watchful gaze of Wall Street, and the slender cleaning woman standing silently behind him had uncovered the entire truth while merely trying to prove her own desperate innocence. Sebastian turned to look at Arya, his gaze still intensely sharp, but utterly stripped of its previous menace. She was not looking at him. Her eyes were fixated on Lucas, sleeping peacefully on the sofa, her amber gaze full of consuming worry, as if afraid their conversation might wake her brother and pull him into their dangerous orbit. Sebastian realized in that precise moment that he had been completely, gravely wrong about her. She was not Moretti's operative, nor a traitor. She was merely a desperate woman fighting a lonely, relentless battle against the entire world to save her brother and clear her name. And in the process of that fight, she had accidentally obtained the key that could destroy his greatest adversary. He looked back at the laptop screen, at the charts and numbers she had painstakingly collected over 3 agonizing years, and a cohesive, brutal plan began to form rapidly in the ruthless mind of the Mafia boss. Sebastian quietly closed the laptop lid and turned to face Arya, his eyes transformed from just a few hours earlier. Gone was the predatory stare of a hunter studying his prey, replaced by the intense focus of someone carefully assembling the scattered pieces of an impossibly complex puzzle. He pulled out a chair at the small kitchen table, motioned for her to sit opposite him, and said in a low voice that now held no discernible threat, "Tell me everything. Start from the very beginning." Arya glanced one last time at Lucas, still resting on the sofa, hesitated for a long, agonizing moment, then finally sat down and began to recount the full story she had never before shared with anyone. She started 9 years earlier, when she was 19 and Lucas was 9. Her parents were driving home from their 25th wedding anniversary dinner when a massive truck with failed brakes sped through a red light. They died instantly, with no opportunity to say goodbye or make any preparations for the 2 children they left behind. Arya received the life-altering call from the police at 3 o'clock in the morning, and her life was irrevocably changed forever. She immediately took a year off from college to arrange the funeral, sell the family house to cover the mortgage debt, find a smaller, cheaper apartment, and petition the court to become Lucas's legal guardian. Though not yet old enough to legally drink, she worked 3 exhausting jobs concurrently. Waiting tables during the chaotic mornings, running a cashier register in the afternoons, and cleaning commercial offices late into the night. She averaged 4 hours of sleep a night for that entire harrowing year. Then, she returned to university, attending classes evenings and weekends, ultimately graduating in finance at the absolute top of her class. Not because she was inherently more brilliant than her peers, but because she simply could not afford the luxury of failure. Lucas required her to succeed. Lucas needed her to earn enough to ensure his care. At 23, Arya was hired by Morgan Whitfield, one of the most prestigious investment firms on Wall Street. She rapidly climbed the corporate ladder, progressing from junior analyst to senior specialist in just 2 years. She was whispered about by colleagues as a data prodigy, for her uncanny ability to discern financial patterns that others missed entirely. At 25, she stumbled upon a secret she was never, ever meant to see. While meticulously analyzing internal transactions for a routine audit project, she noticed glaring irregularities in accounts managed directly by the chief financial officer, Richard Whitfield. Money was systematically flowing out through complex offshore shell companies. Numbers were being subtly manipulated and altered. Someone under the nose of the firm's leadership was laundering a staggering amount of money. Arya, in her painful naivety, truly believed she was doing the right thing by gathering the undeniable evidence to report it. She didn't realize Whitfield had eyes and ears monitoring every corner of the firm. She didn't know he had been watching her movements from the first week she began her investigation. She didn't know he had already prepared a flawless, devastating trap designed specifically to destroy her. On the very morning she planned to submit her comprehensive report, federal agents stormed her office at 9 a.m., carrying a warrant for her arrest on charges of embezzling $8 million from the company fund. The evidence fabricated against her was flawlessly forged. Fake signatures, fraudulent emails, doctored transfer receipts, all pointing directly at her. Arya vividly remembered the cold, sharp cruelty of the handcuffs snapping shut on her wrists, the hushed whispers of colleagues who had once been friendly now viewing her with open revulsion, like a hardened criminal. She remembered the long, humiliating walk down the central corridor between 2 grim-faced agents. And at the end of that corridor, Richard Whitfield was leaning smugly in his doorway, smiling with the self-satisfied triumph of a predator who had just effortlessly crushed an insect that dared to challenge him. The subsequent 3 years had been an unrelieved hellscape. Arya was released on bail only after surrendering every last dollar of her life savings. Her professional reputation was completely annihilated. No legitimate firm would risk hiring someone under federal financial prosecution. Friends instantly vanished. The expensive lawyer she retained took her money and abruptly quit when he fully grasped the extreme difficulty of the case. She sold every remaining possession of value, her car, her mother's few pieces of jewelry, just to cover the rent and purchase Lucas's essential, costly medication. Finally, she secured employment as a janitor at Blackstone Empire, the only place that cared nothing about the past of someone willing to clean toilets. She began again from nothing, working alone late at night with an aging laptop and the razor-sharp analytical skills no one could ever take from her. The trial had been postponed repeatedly because she lacked proper legal representation. But the next hearing was scheduled within 6 months. If she lost, she would face 2 decades in federal prison. Lucas would be abandoned. Her grandmother, residing in a nursing home with rapidly worsening Alzheimer's, would likely die without ever knowing what became of her granddaughter. Everything Arya had fought for, every sacrifice she had made, would become utterly meaningless. Arya finished her account and looked up, her amber eyes dry and hollow, because the reservoir of her tears had run out long ago. Sebastian sat silently across from her, his expression impassive, unreadable. But in the deep, steel-gray eyes of the Mafia boss, something profound had definitely changed. 1 week after that pivotal meeting, Sebastian appeared unexpectedly at the East Side Community Center late in the evening, just as Arya had finished teaching a class and was packing her belongings. She wasn't surprised to see him. A part of her had been anticipating this moment since the day he left her apartment. After hearing her entire, agonizing story, he had not killed her. He had not threatened her again. He had simply stood up and walked away in silence, leaving her overwhelmed by 1,000 unanswered, terrifying questions. For 7 days, she had gone to work at Blackstone Empire as usual. She still mopped floors and cleaned restrooms, but she no longer dared to enter the finance office floor, knowing he was watching, knowing every step she took was monitored, and not wishing to do anything that might cause him to retract his unspoken decision to let her live. Sebastian entered the now empty classroom, closed the door firmly behind him, and looked at her with an expression she still couldn't interpret. He stated that he had ordered comprehensive background checks and confirmed that every detail she had shared was true. The embezzlement case, Lucas's detailed medical history, her exemplary work record at Morgan Whitfield, all perfectly matched her account. But, far more significantly, the dense financial data she had compiled regarding Richard Whitfield revealed a devastating truth Sebastian had spent years hunting down. Whitfield was, in fact, laundering vast sums of money for Victor Moretti, the Cole family's sworn nemesis, and Arya unknowingly held the absolute key to Moretti's ultimate destruction. Sebastian presented his offer, his voice still cold as polished stone, yet every word crystal clear and final. He would personally pay the full cost of Lucas's surgery, $300,000, transferred directly to the hospital within 24 hours. He would retain the best, most ruthless defense lawyers in New York, the kind who specialized in turning black into white, and ensure Richard Whitfield paid for every crime he had committed. In exchange, Arya would utilize her expert financial analysis skills to help him meticulously trace and map Moretti's entire international laundering network via Whitfield's transactions. Arya stood frozen, unsure whether to be overwhelmed by relief or paralyzed by fear. This was the answer to every one of her fervent prayers, the chance to save Lucas and restore her innocence. But she instantly grasped the terrible price. Accepting meant stepping squarely into Sebastian Cole's dangerous world, a shadowy realm of organized crime, deep secrets, and pervasive danger that could cost her life if exposed. She would no longer be a mere innocent victim, but a willing accomplice, even if only indirectly. She finally found her voice and asked him why. Why, if he possessed this devastating evidence, didn't he simply seize her, interrogate her ruthlessly, and take the information he needed by force? Why was he offering a fair, equitable bargain, as if she truly had a viable choice? Sebastian looked at her for a long, heavy moment before replying, his voice dropping slightly, as if speaking more to an internal conviction than to her. He said he had seen enough traitors in his life to know she was not one of them. He had seen the absolute devotion in her eyes when she looked at Lucas, the fact that she was ready to die so her brother could live, the stubborn, solitary courage with which she had fought alone for 3 years without ever breaking. He did not need to coerce people like her. He required willing, absolute cooperation, because only then could he be certain she would give him everything she possessed. Arya considered this in silence, thinking of Lucas growing steadily weaker, of the terrifying approach of the trial date, of the dark, solitary future awaiting them both if she refused to act now. Then, she thought of her hands roughened from mopping floors, yet hands that still remembered the precise movements required to analyze complex financial data, still capable of performing the one thing she did best. At last, she nodded, but she set one absolute condition. Lucas must never, under any circumstances, know about this arrangement. Her brother had to believe the surgery money originated from a benevolent charity fund, that his sister remained nothing more than a simple cleaning woman, that no mafia boss was actively directing the course of their lives. Sebastian agreed instantly, without hesitation, and in that moment, two people from impossibly different worlds forged an alliance that nobody could have ever predicted. Following the agreement, Sebastian immediately relocated Arya to a secure apartment on the affluent Upper East Side, a place where she could work without disturbance. The residence was spacious, luxurious, and fully equipped with state-of-the-art technology. High-performance computers, multiple large analytical screens, everything a forensic financial analyst could ever dream of. Arya moved in with Lucas after telling her brother that a charitable organization was temporarily housing them while they awaited her trial. Lucas didn't ask many penetrating questions, too weakened by his illness to fully question the sudden, dramatic improvement in their living circumstances. Arya was profoundly grateful for his lassitude, even as her heart ached each time she was forced to lie to him. 2 weeks into Arya's intensive work, Sebastian arrived at the apartment one afternoon for a progress update. But this time he was not alone. Ethan's nanny had suddenly fallen gravely ill and was hospitalized. His security detail was wholly incapable of caring for an active 8-year-old boy, and Sebastian had been left with no choice but to bring his son with him. Ethan entered the apartment with his familiar expression of cautious shyness, his wide eyes scanning the unfamiliar space with a mix of curiosity and unease. Lucas was seated on the sofa, watching a movie after his routine medical checkup. And when the thin 18-year-old saw the younger boy standing hesitantly in the doorway, both stared silently at each other like two isolated deer meeting unexpectedly in a dense forest clearing. Sebastian was about to instruct Ethan to sit quietly in a corner and not interrupt the critical adult work. But before he could speak, Lucas spoke first, asking Ethan in his weak but friendly voice if he enjoyed playing video games. Ethan looked instinctively at his father for permission, and when Sebastian offered a small nod, the boy darted forward to sit next to Lucas with an eagerness Sebastian rarely witnessed in his reserved son. The two boys quickly began playing games on the PlayStation console the apartment was equipped with, and within 15 minutes, the vast social and emotional distance between them had completely dissolved. Sebastian sat at the work table with Arya, attempting to focus on the charts and numbers displayed on the screens, but his steely gray gaze kept drifting back to the sofa. Ethan was laughing, not the strained, polite smile he reserved for nannies or bodyguards, not the careful, practiced laugh he had learned to deploy to placate adults, but genuine, unrestrained laughter, shouting when he lost, clapping furiously when he won, and turning to Lucas with undisguised admiration when the older boy demonstrated secret gaming moves. Sebastian could not recall the last time he had heard his son laugh with such pure joy. Perhaps it was before the betrayal of his mother, before Sebastian had coldly exiled her and kept the infant child, before the boy had grown up in a house that was opulent but emotionally cold, with a father who lacked the knowledge of how to truly show love. Arya was also watching the sofa, her amber eyes illuminated by something Sebastian had never seen in them before. Lucas was smiling widely, a faint blush of color rising in his pale cheeks, patiently teaching Ethan how to control the character in the game with the gentle, protective care of an older brother. She realized this was the first time in years Lucas had a real friend to play with, someone who didn't look at him with pity for his condition, didn't treat him like a child who was destined to die, but simply regarded him as a normal friend. The two adults looked at each other across the brightly lit room without speaking, and in that silent exchange, something shifted between them. They were no longer merely a mafia boss and a janitor forced into an uneasy cooperation, but two protective figures watching their children find simple, uncomplicated joy in friendship. Sebastian was the first to look away, his expression quickly snapping back to its familiar, glacial coldness. But Arya had already witnessed the brief flicker of something warm in his steel-gray eyes. A genuine warmth she suspected even he did not realize he was still capable of feeling. The following weeks introduced changes Sebastian had not factored into his strategic calculations. Not in the investigation, nor in the war against Moretti, but within himself. He began inventing reasons to visit the safe apartment far more often than strictly necessary, telling himself he needed to personally check the progress, to ensure Arya wasn't engaged in anything suspicious, to review the latest reports. But deep down, he knew these were elaborate excuses, transparent rationalizations he concocted to justify being in the same space as her. Sebastian typically arrived late in the evenings, after the city's rush had quieted and the day's obligations at Blackstone Empire were finally set aside. He always brought Ethan, under the convenient pretense that the boy required a playmate for stimulation. Ethan and Lucas, initially hesitant, had quickly become inseparable, a dynamic duo of innocent mischief. They were two lonely children who had unexpectedly discovered a pure, deep connection, a friendship untainted by the complex darkness of the adult world that circled them. While the boys occupied the oversized leather sofa, immersed in video games and whispered secrets, Sebastian positioned himself at the makeshift workstation and simply watched Arya. She worked with an intense, almost frightening focus, becoming so absorbed that the world outside her glowing screen seemed to vanish. Her amber eyes were locked onto the rows of data, fingers a blur across the keyboard, moving at a speed Sebastian found astonishing for someone self-taught. Her brow would faintly furrow whenever a discrepancy surfaced, a number refusing to align with the expected narrative. Sebastian had employed dozens of financial experts, graduates plucked from the most prestigious Ivy League universities, yet none possessed the innate ability to analyze complex financial architecture with the speed and chilling accuracy of the slender cleaning woman sitting mere feet away. He found himself increasingly captivated by her mind. The intuitive way she connected seemingly unrelated fragments of data into a coherent, devastating whole, and the clarity with which she could distill complex, illicit schemes into simple, understandable terms when he occasionally questioned her findings. But the attraction was not purely intellectual. Sebastian observed her meticulous care for Lucas. Every hour, even amidst a complicated analysis, she would rise to check on him, her attention absolute. He watched her prepare simple, yet deliberately nutritious meals. He saw the rare, profound softness in her smile reserved solely for her brother, a gentleness she displayed toward no one else. He recognized the heavy, silent weight of her exhaustion, the deep worry masked by a manufactured calm, all sustained for Lucas's sake. She carried the weight of a staggering burden on those slender shoulders, yet never offered a single word of complaint or self-pity. Arya was fundamentally unlike any woman he had ever encountered in his insulated life. She never flattered him for favor. She did not cower in fear before his reputation. She made no attempt to subtly seduce him for personal advantage. She simply performed her duties, cared for her brother, and treated him with the measured, professional respect of someone honoring a severe agreement. That undeniable, stark purity was a paradox. It made him want desperately to draw closer, to explore the unspoiled center of her being, and simultaneously, it terrified him, compelling him to run far, far away from the risk she represented to his frozen heart. One exceptionally late night, Sebastian arrived unannounced, seeking the most recent progress report. What he found tightened his chest with an unexpected, sharp contraction. Arya had succumbed to exhaustion, having fallen asleep instantly at the desk, her head pillowed awkwardly on her arm. The computer screen still glowed faintly, illuminating unfinished charts detailing offshore transactions. Beside her, a cup of long cold coffee and a plate holding a crust of forgotten bread testified to her desperate routine. He stood motionless, studying her sleeping profile. The stark shadows of dark circles beneath her closed eyes, the faint, tired lines etched around her mouth that, even in sleep, retained a delicate grace. It struck him then, with overwhelming certainty, that she had been running on inadequate sleep for a very long time. Perhaps for years, long before their paths tragically intersected. Sebastian remained there for what felt like an eternity, completely uncertain of the proper protocol. Then he acted on an unplanned, unprecedented impulse. He walked silently to the closet, retrieved a thin wool throw, and gently, carefully, draped it across her slender shoulders, ensuring not to disturb her rest. He lingered, watching her peaceful, exhausted breathing for a few more seconds. Unconsciously, his hand began to lift, drawn toward a stray lock of dark hair falling across her cheek, as if to brush it away, but he caught himself mid-motion, his fingers freezing in the air before slowly withdrawing. He departed the apartment in utter silence, closing the door softly behind him. Yet, throughout the long drive back to his insulated penthouse, he could not banish her image. Her soft breathing, her closed amber eyes, the image of vulnerability he had covered with the blanket. A strange, unfamiliar warmth had begun to spread through the fortress he called his chest, a feeling he had ruthlessly sworn never to permit himself again after the calculated betrayal of his former wife. Miles away, in the insulated opulence of Morgan Whitfield's corporate headquarters, Richard Whitfield sat within his mahogany-paneled office. His gaze was fixed, cold, and venomous, on the latest report from the private investigator he had maintained on Arya Bennett for 3 agonizing years. The findings were not merely concerning. They were acutely alarming. The report stated that she had completely vacated her old Queen's apartment almost 2 months prior, had ceased working the night shift at Blackstone Empire without notice, and that her current whereabouts were unknown even to her few known associates. Whitfield was calculating, but not a fool. He knew that Arya had been meticulously gathering evidence against him even before he engineered her framing. His 3 years of constant, costly surveillance had been his insurance policy, a guarantee that she could never gather the leverage needed to turn the tables. Now, she had evaporated like smoke, and that sudden, professional disappearance could only signify one thing. She had secured protection from someone powerful enough to shield her from his extensive reach. With a hand that trembled slightly with rising panic, Whitfield seized the secure phone line and dialed Victor Moretti, the shadow partner for whom he had been laundering catastrophic sums of money for nearly a decade. He relayed the situation, his voice tight with urgency, insisting that Moretti had to find Arya immediately. If she possessed enough documented evidence regarding their extensive money laundering network, their entire interconnected operation, and both of their lives would implode. Moretti listened to the frantic report in chilling silence, eventually replying with a single, icily detached sentence, that he would handle the matter personally. 48 hours later, Moretti's extensive network located Arya at the Sunshine Nursing Home. Her grandmother resided there, and Arya, burdened by fierce loyalty, visited every Saturday afternoon. A predictable, unwavering routine she could not abandon, even knowing the risk it placed her under. Moretti immediately dispatched 2 of his most specialized operatives, ordering them to shadow her and await the perfect, isolated opportunity. That Saturday afternoon, Arya left the nursing home with a heart heavy with profound, silent grief. Minutes earlier, the reality of her grandmother's cognitive decline had slammed into her. The old woman no longer recognized her, asking who the kind visitor was, confusing Arya with her long-deceased mother, and weeping for grandchildren whose faces had faded from memory. Numbed by this fresh wave of sadness, Arya walked toward the bus stop, enveloped by the fading, weak light of the setting sun. She was utterly unaware of the 2 shadows trailing her. They struck the moment she turned into a grimy, deserted shortcut alley she habitually used to save a few minutes. A thick, rough hand clamped brutally over her mouth from behind, suffocating her attempted scream. Another powerful arm locked around her waist, dragging her deeper into the suffocating darkness. Arya struggled with primal ferocity, desperate to make a noise, but only muffled gasps escaped. She was slammed back against the rough brick wall. Her head hit the unforgiving surface with a sickening thud, and the world dissolved into a painful, nauseating spin. One attacker yanked her hair, forcing her head into an exposed position, and stated coldly, "Mr. Moretti sends his regards. You meddled where you shouldn't have. Now you pay." The other man began to punch her stomach, heavy, methodical blows that doubled her over in searing pain, stealing her breath and her voice, leaving her nothing but sheer, desperate endurance. Warm blood began to trickle from the gash on her head, running down her face. Arya was certain she would die here, in this filthy, anonymous alley, unseen and unremembered. Lucas would be waiting forever for a sister who would never return. But death did not claim her. Instead, a figure materialized at the alley's entrance, moving with the terrifying speed and silence of a phantom in the gathering gloom. Sebastian spoke no word, issued no warning, and allowed zero time for reaction. He lunged like a predator unleashed, seizing the nearest attacker and shattering his skull against the brick wall with a wet, bone-crunching sound. The second man reacted instantly, drawing a switchblade, but Sebastian was already in motion. He blocked the lethal sweep with his left forearm, ignoring the immediate, deep incision that spurted blood. His right hand had already produced his weapon. 2 shots rang out, sharp, echoing, and mercilessly precise, ripping through the quiet night. Both hitmen crumpled, lifeless, onto the concrete. Sebastian stood momentarily between the corpses, his chest heaving with exertion, his once white shirt already soaked dark with his own blood, his steel-gray eyes burning with residual, terrifying rage. Arya sat paralyzed, trembling against the wall, staring up at him in profound shock. She had glimpsed the true, unvarnished monster that Sebastian Cole was, a man capable of killing without a flicker of hesitation or remorse. Yet, her trembling was not born of fear of his brutality, but from a sudden, staggering realization. He had killed to save her. He had willingly taken a wound to protect her. He had been there, appearing out of nowhere, precisely when her life hinged on a miracle. Sebastian dropped to his knees beside her, searching her eyes. His voice, surprisingly, was tight and slightly unsteady as he asked, "Are you all right?" It was a question delivered with a genuine, raw concern she had never imagined hearing from the mouth of the Mafia boss. Arya found herself unable to speak. She could only stare, and silent tears began to carve trails down her bruised cheeks, mixing instantly with the warm blood flowing from her head wound. Sebastian rapidly transported Arya to a location known only to his closest inner circle, a hidden hospital the organization maintained for injured members requiring absolute secrecy. It was an immaculate, fully equipped underground facility, nestled beneath the basement of a nondescript private clinic in Brooklyn, staffed by doctors and nurses bound by ironclad oaths of silence. Arya was rushed inside immediately. The medic worked efficiently. The laceration on her scalp required 7 carefully placed stitches, and while her ribs were mercifully unbroken, they were badly bruised, with ugly, dark purple blotches already blossoming across her torso. The head doctor was firm. She required a minimum of 1 week of complete rest, 0 stress, and only sleep to allow her battered body to commence healing. Sebastian nodded once, his face granite. He instantly ordered Daniel to mobilize double security around the entire facility perimeter, then ignored protocol, dragged a hard chair to Arya's bedside, and sat down. Daniel stared at him, his surprise evident. "Sir, others can stay watch. You need to go home and treat that cut on your arm." Sebastian did not move, only leveling a cold, steel-gray glare that conveyed absolute finality. The loyal lieutenant instantly bowed his head and retreated without another word. That night, Sebastian remained rooted by Arya's bed for hours, relentlessly monitoring her face as she slept a pain-induced slumber. Her cheeks were already swollen and bruised, her lips cracked, and the fresh white bandages circling her head were stained dark with dried blood. Yet, even ravaged like this, she possessed a fragile, holding beauty that commanded his entire focus. As he watched her, a violent surge of anger clenched his chest. Anger not at her, but at himself for the failure of protection, and a white-hot fury directed at Moretti and Whitfield for daring to lay hands on someone who, shockingly, he now considered his. That proprietorial thought rattled him to the core. Who exactly was she to him? A temporary business partner, a means to dismantle an enemy, a cleaning woman he happened to save from an assault? If that was truly all, why was he sitting vigil all night instead of delegating the task? Why had the sight of her beaten in that alley felt like a cold knife plunged directly into his own chest? Why had he dispatched those 2 men with a savage brutality far exceeding what was necessary, as if they had desecrated something holy? Sebastian closed his eyes, instantly recalling the face of his former wife, the woman he had loved more deeply than his own life, the woman he had trusted implicitly, who had, in turn, sold his deepest secrets to his enemies, almost annihilating the entire empire his father had built with blood and sweat. Since that devastating day, he had sworn an inviolable oath never to trust a woman again, never to expose a weakness for anyone save Ethan. His heart had calcified into a fortress of unforgiving ice. He believed that state would endure until his death. Then Arya had entered his world. With her proud, pained amber eyes, her quiet courage that refused to beg even in the face of death, her fierce, unconditional devotion to her sick brother, and the strange purity of someone betrayed by the world, yet refusing to be turned bitter. She was the antithesis of his former wife. She sought nothing from him but a fair chance. She didn't flatter, she didn't manipulate. She was simply, profoundly herself, and that was more dangerous than any calculated scheme. Arya stirred lightly in her sleep, her lips moving faintly as if murmuring a name. Without conscious thought, Sebastian leaned forward and gently encompassed her small, bruised hand in his own large one. He didn't know the definition of the action, or what he ultimately desired. He only knew, with painful clarity, that in this moment, he could not leave her alone. 2 weeks following the delicate surgery, Lucas was demonstrating a recovery rate that delighted Dr. Thompson and surpassed all initial predictions. He was able to sit up easily, shared private laughter with Ethan over video calls, and a much-needed, natural color was slowly beginning to return to his pale cheeks. Arya, consumed by care, spent most daylight hours at the hospital. However, by agreement, she returned nightly to the secure apartment to continue the indispensable data analysis she had promised Sebastian. And that night, with Lucas finally sleeping soundly under the watchful eye of a dedicated nurse, Arya sat before the screen and completed the final, critical segments of the financial mosaic she had been assembling for months. She finished tracing the entire, intricate Moretti laundering network, documenting Richard Whitfield's transactions from obscure shell companies established in the Cayman Islands to secret numbered bank accounts nestled in Switzerland. The paper trail covered everything from phantom real estate holdings in Miami to fake investments across Europe. It was all meticulously documented, flawlessly analyzed, and more than sufficient evidence to guarantee both Whitfield and Moretti would face federal prison sentences spanning decades. But the information that stopped Arya cold, freezing her breath in her chest, was not the staggering laundering figures. While verifying the network's most recent financial movements, she found a massive transfer originating from Whitfield's covert account, routed into a digital network she immediately recognized as belonging to professional assassins. The staggering sum was $5 million, deposited in 3 strategic transfers the previous week. When she ran the decryption protocol on the accompanying encoded note, the target was revealed: Sebastian Cole. The planned date of execution was this coming Saturday, only 4 days away, scheduled to take place at a high-profile charity event where Sebastian was slated to appear as the guest of honor. Arya sat utterly motionless, staring at the damning evidence, her mind reeling through 1,000 conflicting thoughts. She had attained everything she fought for. The proof of her innocence was complete. The expensive lawyer Sebastian had procured had confirmed these documents guaranteed the dismissal of all charges against her, ensuring Richard Whitfield would finally face justice. Lucas's surgery was successful, and his recovery was stable. She was no longer bound to Sebastian by any clause of their original, desperate agreement. She was free. She could gather her evidence, take Lucas out of New York the moment he was strong enough to travel, and vanish from this violent, dark world forever. Sebastian would remain unaware of the imminent assassination plot until it was too late. And truly, she rationalized, that wasn't her burden. He was a mafia boss, a ruthless criminal, a man who lived by violence and who inherently understood he would likely die by violence. That was the harsh, unbreakable law of a world she fundamentally did not belong to. But as Arya pictured walking away without a word, the image of Ethan materialized in her mind. The 8-year-old with his late mother's eyes, the desperately lonely boy who had finally found his first genuine friend in Lucas, who had asked constantly when Lucas would be well enough to play again. If Sebastian died, Ethan would lose his father, just as Arya and Lucas had lost theirs 9 years prior. The boy would be left in an even colder world, presiding over a leaderless mafia empire surrounded by countless waiting enemies. Arya then thought of Sebastian himself, the man who had saved her life in that foul alley, who had sat by her bedside all night while she was injured, who had endured 8 hours of agonizing waiting during Lucas's surgery, who had simply held her without judgment as she cried away 3 years of suppressed grief. He was a criminal, yes, a killer, the head of a dark, sprawling empire. But he was also a devoted father. He was a man deeply scarred by betrayal whose heart had seemingly frozen solid. He was the one person who had given her a chance when everyone else believed her a villain. Arya reached for the phone, her hand steady now. When Sebastian answered, she spoke in a voice that brooked no argument. She needed to see him immediately. There was something he absolutely had to know, a matter of life and death. Sebastian's immediate response was sharp and laced with the concern she had learned to recognize. "Are you all right?" Arya countered immediately. "It's not me," she said, her voice dropping to a low, urgent warning. "It's you. You are in mortal danger." Sebastian listened to Arya detail her terrifying discovery, laying out the decoded notes and the incriminating $5 million transfer, without betraying a flicker of emotion. But the characteristic steel gray of his eyes visibly deepened, darkening to the impenetrable color of a churning sky just before a hurricane breaks. When she finally finished, he asked her only one question, his voice low and devoid of judgment. Why? Why had she risked everything to warn him, when she already possessed the leverage she needed to walk away and achieve absolute freedom? Arya met his intense gaze and answered with the same quiet, unwavering composure she reserved for her financial analysis. It was because he had saved her brother, she explained. Because he had intervened in that alley and saved her life. But most importantly, it was because Ethan needed his father, just as Lucas needed her. She stated simply that she could not bear to stand by and watch a child lose the person he loved when she possessed the power to intervene. Sebastian studied her face for a long, heavy moment in absolute silence. Then, a single, sharp nod affirmed her sincerity and the gravity of her warning. He stood abruptly and left the apartment to prepare for a war. A war he knew would not only decide his own fate, but the future of the entire Blackstone Empire. He would not wait to be hunted. On Friday night, precisely 2 days before the scheduled assassination, Sebastian Cole struck first. He took the war directly to their doorstep. Blackstone's most elite tactical unit was mobilized under a veil of total secrecy. 50 of his most loyal, battle-hardened men, armed and trained explicitly for overwhelming close-quarters combat. Their target was Victor Moretti's fortified mansion on Long Island, where Moretti was currently hosting a private victory celebration with his most trusted lieutenants, toasting what they believed would be the swift and clean elimination of Sebastian Cole. They never anticipated that the supposed prey would become the instantaneous, brutal hunter. The assault commenced at 11 p.m., when the party was reaching its arrogant height and Moretti's state-of-the-art security system had already been completely neutralized from the inside by a deep-cover mole Sebastian had strategically planted years prior. Gunfire erupted, tearing through the quiet sanctity of the wealthy neighborhood, and the blinding flash of concussion grenades lit the trees like momentary, searing fireworks from hell. Sebastian himself led the charge through the breached front doors, a heavy-caliber pistol tight in his hand. Years of suppressed rage finally and violently unleashed. That night instantly became the bloodiest engagement in the long, shadowed war between the two criminal families. Moretti's men fought back fiercely, but they were catastrophically surprised and unprepared for the speed and magnitude of the retaliation. Room by room, the Grand Mansion was converted into a brutal, confined battlefield, where every shadow concealed a trap and every second cost a life. Sebastian moved through the chaos, a dark, unstoppable force of focused vengeance, leaving destruction in his wake. House like death itself, cold and merciless. Every movement Sebastian made was precise, every shot exact and fatal. He carved a path through the opulent floors until he found Victor Moretti in his third-floor study. The room, lined with antique books and dark mahogany, was open to the night air. Moretti was desperately attempting to hoist himself through a wide window, a panicked attempt at escape that betrayed his usual arrogant demeanor. Sebastian kicked the door inward with a crash that echoed through the otherwise silent mansion, and the two men faced each other. In that frozen moment, decades of brutal, blood-soaked history and inherited hatred passed between them in a single unspoken look. Moretti's hand flew instinctively toward the polished desk where his personal sidearm lay, but Sebastian was faster. A blur of controlled motion. Two sharp cracks shattered the silence. The first shot struck Moretti's shoulder, spinning him away from the weapon. The second, impacting his chest, sent Victor Moretti crashing violently onto the polished oak floor of his own magnificent, dying house. Sebastian walked deliberately toward his struggling, dying enemy. He looked down with eyes of glacial ice and a voice devoid of feeling, and he spoke the final, unambiguous verdict. This was the price for touching what was his. Moretti, gasping his last breaths, did not even comprehend who or what Sebastian meant by his, and Sebastian did not offer any explanation. The third and final shot rang out, a definitive period mark that ended the life of the rival Mafia boss and definitively closed the intergenerational war that had consumed the city's underworld for decades. Simultaneously, miles away in Manhattan, a heavily secured, anonymous package was delivered to the FBI headquarters. It contained exhaustive, irrefutable evidence of Richard Whitfield's sprawling money laundering operation. No operative could trace the sender, but the documentation was so surgically precise and meticulous that its contents could not be disputed or ignored. Every transaction was meticulously traced, every shell company exposed, every dirty dollar followed back to its corrupt source. The FBI mobilized immediately, descending that very night. At exactly 3 o'clock in the morning, Richard Whitfield was violently awakened by the insistent, heavy pounding on his front door and the blinding flash of red and blue lights surrounding his sprawling Connecticut estate. He was handcuffed in front of his stunned wife and terrified children, led away in his silk pajamas. For the first time in his life, the ingrained, corrosive arrogance drained entirely from his face, replaced by a raw, deeply unsettling fear. The news exploded the next morning, dominating every major headline with the arrest of Richard Whitfield, the highly influential CFO of Morgan Whitfield, on charges including money laundering, wire fraud, and criminal conspiracy. Amidst the sensational headlines, one small, almost overlooked detail appeared. The decade-old embezzlement case against former employee Arya Bennett was being urgently reviewed by federal prosecutors, and was now likely to be entirely dismissed as new evidence conclusively showed she had been the victim of a deliberate, malicious frame-up. Arya read the news on her phone, sitting quietly beside Lucas's hospital bed. Tears slipped quietly down her cheeks. Not tears of sadness, but of a profound, soul-deep release. 3 years. 3 years of searing pain, inescapable shame, and crushing despair. 3 years of being branded a criminal, abandoned by society, and systematically pushed to the red bottom line of existence. And now, finally, the unambiguous truth was in the open. She was not guilty. She had never been guilty, and the entire world would soon know it. 6 months after the seismic events that had shaken the foundations of New York, a small yet deeply meaningful opening ceremony took place in the east side of Queens. The old, weather-beaten community center, with its faded, peeling sign, had been replaced by a modern, time-honored 3-story structure featuring contemporary equipment, bright, spacious classrooms, a state-of-the-art computer library, and a community hall large enough to comfortably host hundreds of people. The new sign above the entrance glowed softly in the gentle spring sunlight, emblazoned with the words, Bennett Financial Literacy Center. It was a name Arya had humbly refused many times, but finally accepted when Rosa Martinez and all her former students insisted upon it with overwhelming love and admiration. Sebastian arrived with Ethan, both dressed in impeccably tailored, elegant black suits, appearing like larger and smaller, highly polished reflections of each other. The head of the Blackstone Empire positioned himself deliberately in the last row, trying not to draw attention, yet his powerful presence still stirred quiet, reverent whispers among the attendees. No one knew exactly what his relationship was with the young director of the new center, only that a massive, truly anonymous donation had made the entire miraculous transformation possible. But her eyes instinctively found him at the back of the room, and every word she spoke felt written exclusively for him. The ceremony ended in a wave of thunderous applause and tears of pure joy. Her former students embraced her tightly. Rosa Martinez cried openly with pride. And Lucas ran up to hug his sister with all the strength his new, healthy heart allowed. When the crowd slowly thinned, leaving only those closest to her, Sebastian found Arya standing alone by the large window overlooking the neighborhood she had belonged to for so many years. He stood beside her, shoulder to shoulder, a silent pillar of strength. They watched Ethan and Lucas laughing together in the courtyard below, their innocent voices floating up like a pure song of hope. Sebastian spoke first, his voice low, gravelly, and softer than she had ever heard it. He simply said that she had profoundly changed the way he saw the entire world. Arya turned to him, her warm amber eyes meeting his steady, steel-gray gaze, and she replied that he had saved her world. They stood there for a long time without needing more words, because sometimes silence between two people who truly understand each other speaks louder than 1,000 carefully constructed sentences. And then Sebastian did something he never would have conceived of doing 6 months earlier. He reached out and gently took her hand. It was not the firm grasp of a boss and an employee. It was not the careful clasp of allies in a transactional business pact. It was the sincere, open touch of a man opening his carefully shielded heart to a woman he no longer wished, could no longer bear to lose. And Arya did not pull away. She let her fingers interlace with his, feeling the warmth of a hand that had killed without blinking yet had also covered her tenderly with a blanket when she slept. She knew their story was not over. It was only just beginning. That evening they drove in opposite directions. Sebastian returned to his penthouse atop Manhattan, and Arya drove back to the new apartment in Queens she had rented for herself and Lucas. But before parting, Sebastian paused and asked if she would bring Lucas to the science camp Ethan would attend next month. Arya smiled, a genuine, radiant smile, and nodded. As the black Maybach disappeared swiftly down the street, Arya looked up at the new sign glowing under the streetlights. This center was built for second chances. Built for a girl once framed and pushed to the bottom of society, for a mafia boss who had forgotten how to trust after profound betrayal, for 2 lonely boys who finally found unbreakable friendship, and for all those who believe that life can still be beautiful even after the deepest, darkest nights. And this story teaches us never to judge others by appearances or current circumstances, because each person carries a unique, complex story invisible to the eye. It reminds us that resilience and love can carry us through any adversity, and that second chances are always worth giving to those who never, ever give up. It shows us that even in the deepest darkness, there are always sparks of kindness and redemption waiting to be found. If this story has touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel. Like and share this video with those you love, so we can continue sharing meaningful stories together. We would love to know how you felt about Arya and Sebastian. Have you ever been misunderstood or judged unfairly? Do you believe everyone deserves a second chance? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. We truly look forward to hearing from your heart and connecting with you through each story. Thank you for staying with us to the end of this video. We wish you and your family good health, happiness, and peace in every day.